Chapter 2262. The pressure on Chong Lu was getting bigger and bigger. After all, he was not Li Wuya, so he could not dominate those of the same level. Da Peng's original form and Zhu Mingzi's true martial lord Lingying. These two people were fighting him in the swordsman's strongest area. This was a risk, but it was also a strategy. The biggest meaning was that in close combat, no one could escape without permission. This prevented the swordsman from using the escape technique to delay time and gain precious time to breathe. This was the only way to kill the swordsman. When the demon swordsman was at his peak, neither of them had a chance. Therefore, there was a meaning in persevering now. This was a roulette game that no one could stop. Because they were in close combat, no one could bear the consequences of taking the initiative to leave. Da Peng and Zhu Mingzi could still replace each other, but Chong Lu could not. Under the pressure, he was slipping further and further on the road of overdraft. At this point in the battle, it was hard to say who would fall for whose trick. Chong Lu seemed to have fallen for the trick, but he also took the opportunity to kill two people. If he killed one more in the next life and death battle, then he would be able to break through the encirclement of 9 people with his own strength. The rest of his fighting spirit would not be there, and he would not be in the mood to fight anymore. Da Peng's group seemed to be at a disadvantage so far. Out of 9 people, they had lost 2. If the 5 winged people who were playing tricks were removed, in fact, only the 2 of them were working together. Therefore, they could not retreat. If they retreated again, they would not be able to summon up their fighting spirit. It could be said that out of the 19 people who came to Winged Sky to carry out the erasure mission, the 2 of them were the strongest. One was the Night Watcher of the 8th Sky. The other was the King of Beasts, Da Peng. They were obviously stronger than the others by a large margin, which was why they dared to fight force with force. At this level, they were all prepared to die for their cause. You can't subjectively say who is afraid of death, who is not afraid of death. When facing each other, they were not afraid of death. But now both sides are going all out. Not being afraid of death was their basic attitude. There was no other way out. The 5 winged men watched with trepidation, and they clicked their tongues. My goodness, if this continues, it's really hard to say who will emerge victorious. Second senior brother, what do you think? Ordinary gamers' face darkened. The swordsman will lose. However, between Da Peng and Zhu Mingzi, one of them would die. Therefore, it was also a Pyrrhic victory. We can't just watch from the sidelines. If both sides continue to fight like this, the 5 of us may become the only decisive force here. How should he choose? Which side should he stand on? You have to make a decision as soon as possible. Don't make a hasty decision at the last minute. The winged ones were all very quiet. No one was willing to be the first to speak. The reason why they had been slacking was because they did not want to make this decision. He wanted the 2 of them to decide who was better. Then they would sit on top of the wall and see which way to jump. Asking them to jump before they could determine the gender of the 2 parties was a real dilemma. This was the difficulty of a small force. In front of a colossus like the human corporation, a single wrong step could lead to a disaster for them. Da Peng and Zhu Mingzi had already gone through 3 rounds. In other words, the swordsman had already lasted for nearly 50 breaths of time in this life-and-death duel, in addition to killing the ancestral, which in the early stages. He was still not at a disadvantage and did not make any mistakes. It was really scary. However, humans were not machines. The longer he persisted, the more it meant that the time of collapse or destruction was approaching. The winged ones did not have much time left. Seeing that everyone was looking at her, Shuiyu sighed. She did not want to make a decision, but these senior brothers were really, intuitively, I am leaning towards the new force. They may be weaker, but they represent change. We, the winged ones, need change the most. However, rationally, I know that we should choose the conservative force. Otherwise, not to mention the change of era, we might not even be able to survive the previous few thousand years. Shuiyu paused, as if she was gathering her courage for her final decision. Individual cultivation depends on intuition. The survival of the group depends on rationality. Therefore, since we have decided, There's no need to wait for the final result. In the end, both sides will be in trouble. The new force will hate us, and the conservative force will treat us as fence-sitters. Then let's just join now. We can't blame anyone but the swordsman for not showing an overwhelming advantage. The winged ones remained silent and made their own preparations. They knew that now was not the time to discuss and argue. The only thing they could do now was to make one voice and one direction. The 5 of them were about to spread out and form an attack formation to join in the encirclement of the demon sword lord. This meant that some of them might lose their lives, but before the survival of their race, no one would back down. However, before they could take action, a voice suddenly sounded from behind them. "How many birdmen? Get the hell away from me. If you clap and cheer wrongly, I will take it that you have bad intentions, and will make you into a pile with those monks." A figure flitted past Shui Yu like a ghost. The murderous aura around him made the winged ones, who had never known fear, shiver. "You are that undying one, right? You stood on the wrong side tens of thousands of years ago. Why don't you learn your lesson? If you continue to spread lies here, I will bend your bird head and stuff it into that thing." Complete disregard, a direct insult. But if you consider that the 4 great monks were taken care of by this person in such a short time, then the so-called insult did not seem so unacceptable. But he was still a half-immortal after all. His heart was filled with resentment, and he once again looked at Shui Yu. Shui Yu was ashamed and resentful, because she had already suffered a similar insult 20,000 years ago. It seemed to have been said by a fierce person called Ge. Her initial feeling was that if she did not comply, she might really experience such a feeling. Now, it was the second time and the same feeling. If she disobeyed the person in front of her, the experience from 20,000 years ago would definitely reappear. What made her the most ashamed and resentful was that she felt a warmth behind her back. Was it the anticipation of a new experience? The nightmare of 20,000 years had not disappeared even now. It was still hidden in the deepest part of her heart. She could not tell if it was fear or hope. This feeling made her feel weak. If any of her companions did not care about anything and rose up bravely, she would definitely follow closely behind. She would no longer think about personal cultivation or the continuation of the tribe, only for the joy of this moment. However, these usually awe-inspiring senior brothers had once again handed over the initiative to her one by one. They did not care about the fact that she was just a weak woman. They were really unworthy of being a man. Gritting her teeth, Shui made the most humiliating and correct decision in her life. Let's retreat. Chapter 2263. Lu Xiaoyi quietly approached slowly. He knew very well that now was not the time to intervene immediately. His arrival could not be concealed, so it was impossible to achieve the conditions for a sneak attack. Close combat was too dangerous. Not only would it threaten the opponent, but it would also stimulate Chong Lu. He still had to give the old man face. After fighting for so long, if he intervened, wouldn't it be obvious that the old man was not going to win? Moreover, on the tactical psychological level, the 2 opponents who had been fighting a high-intensity battle were now at their most excited and sensitive state. There was no need to provoke them at their strongest state now. He had to wait for the other side to see that things were not harmonious and stop fighting to find another way out. The moment they relaxed, he would suddenly make a move. When a person suddenly slowed down from a tense rhythm and suddenly returned to a more intense rhythm than before, there will definitely be a loophole. The principle of this kind of outbreak was not to stop. If he stopped and started again, there would be a lot of loopholes. He was such a vicious person. If he did not kill now, it would be the best time to kill. Because Da Peng and Zhu Mingzi did not need him to make a move. They had already fallen into a complete panic. This kind of psychological pressure was much worse than if he had to do it himself. When the sword fell, it did not matter. Just fight with all your might. The uncomfortable thing was that the sword had not fallen yet. Who would it fall on? When would it fall? What about the monks? Were they dead or alive? These questions directly hit the depths of their heart, making them suffer. Continue to maintain the pressure on Chong Lu? How could that be possible? If it did not continue, would they admit defeat? To fight or not to fight? How to fight? Who would fight who? Would there be a chance? The five-winged people had clearly expressed their attitude and hid far away. Not to mention helping. As Lu Xiaoyi threatened, they were afraid of applauding the wrong way and cheering the wrong way. The momentum was gone. One-on-one. Who could beat Chong Lu? Who could defeat this rising star of the Sword Mountain who had single-handedly crushed 4 eminent monks of great virtue? Mixed doubles was even worse. How could their cooperation be compared to 2 Xianyuan swordsmen? That was a well-known violent gang in the universe. The death of Yang Xiaohua and Zue Yang in front of everyone had clearly told them the answer. Perhaps it was just a question of how to find a way out of this situation. Would a Xianyuan swordsman give him a way out? And in such a Dao battle, what was he thinking? He only had the thought of beating a drowning dog. Pity was never a swordsman's temperament, especially when he was in a killing frenzy. Demon Lord continued to attack, but before, he was passive. But now he was active. He was aggressive, and he wanted to chase after the enemy. Now that he was fighting against Da Ping, he couldn't retreat even if he wanted to because Zhu Mingzi couldn't replace him. This Taoist had already been targeted by another vicious sword. In the past, they forced Chong Lu to stop. But now, Chong Lu forced him to stop. Every dog has its day. This year, it's my turn. But this time, the heavens changed so fast that they didn't have any psychological preparation. He could only follow. Chong Lu was in a happy mood, but he followed with a heavy heart. There was no hope at all. It was a dark road. This was not Da Ping's persistence. But before he found a way, he could only follow, but he was no longer attacking like before. Instead, he turned into a defensive counterattack. Defense was the main, offense was the supplement. He was waiting for a miracle, waiting for Zhu Mingzi, waiting for a few monks that might suddenly appear, or a Taoist. Zhu Mingzi could no longer replace Da Ping, because his luck was not very good. He just happened to have a bye. As a result, he bumped into this even more ferocious tiger. If he could choose, he would rather choose Demon Lord, who might be a dying oil lamp, than choose this evil thing with a smirk on his face. From the beginning, this bastard was playing psychological warfare. The key was that he knew this, but he didn't know how to deal with it. He tried to calm down his slightly irritated breath because of the fierce battle. He no longer maintained the form of true martial Lord Lingying. Close combat was useless now. On the contrary, it might bring him passivity. Then he opened his mouth. Da Ping. He shouldn't have opened his mouth, because once he opened his mouth, he was discouraged. He also shouldn't have removed the form of true martial Lord Lingying. This meant that he had lost his confidence. He wanted to reach a result that both sides could accept through communication. After all, they still had 4 Taoist companions. The winged men were just watching. They hadn't completely betrayed them, so they still had the capital to talk. But he underestimated Da Ping Lu's viciousness. As soon as he opened his mouth, the sword river suddenly rose. The decisive battle began without hesitation. Zhu Mingzi was already used to using the form of true martial lord protector. With this sudden change, the rhythm soared again. From a close combat life and death battle to a Taoist life and death battle. Habit, sudden change, consumption, breathing, uneasiness, worry, regret. When all these were stacked together, there was only one result. A crisp defeat. A defeat without any temper. A natural death. This was the true essence of a battle. From the moment you appeared, when you planned everything and chose the most suitable time, your true strength was no longer important. Under the lightning, no egg could escape unscathed. The 5-winged ones stared with their mouths agape as Lu Xiaoyi crushed the 8th-day Watcher like he was chopping up vegetables. They never thought that the famous Night Watcher would be so weak. It was as if he had become a different person. He was no longer the guest of the immortal court who could perfectly exchange hundreds of moves with the demon sword venerable. He was just like a fox pretending to be a tiger. His mentality collapsed. The winged men felt cold all over because they could understand Zhu Mingzi's current mentality. In a short contact with Lu Xiaoyi, they had been collapsing in all kinds of ways. Collapsing because of lack of strength. Collapsing because they were worried about the inheritance of their race. Collapsing because that person was rude and unreasonable. Collapsing because their anus was itching. The application of the momentum was still outside the board. The way to determine victory was profound and profound. It originated from a universe and began from the beginning of the era. Such a person couldn't be defied. As the Tao disappeared, Lu Xiaoyi slowly pulled out the 7th and licked his lips. This isn't satisfying enough. He suddenly turned around and shouted at the winged men. This place deserves applause. The winged men began to clap sparsely for him. They were all forced to do so. The situation was set. The rising power couldn't be stopped. This was a crazy power. In front of Mad Dog, you can't be crazy with him, right? Lu Xiaoyi laughed and crashed into the battle. His mouth was still full of filth. Previously, you two took turns. Now, the tables have turned. Old people, move aside. My old waist can't take it anymore. Don't be a hero. This is our era. No one can stop the young people from being a hero. He forcefully crashed in. Thousands of rays of light shone. He finally had the chance to display the sword techniques he learned from Shi Zhao. It was extremely difficult to wait for someone who could let him display his full strength. The Peng might not be, but at least he was the closest one so far. He had waited for this day for a long time. Chapter 2264. The Peng wanted to cry, but had no tears. It couldn't say that this was unfair, because they had been so unfair before. It wanted to beg for mercy, but its pride as the king of beasts didn't allow it to do so. It wanted to negotiate, but it seemed that they didn't have the capital to negotiate anymore. Putting aside the winged people who were completely neutral, there were only 5 of them, even if he added up the 4 Taoists. Against 3 swordsmen, they were bound to lose. It seemed that there was no other way but to hold on. It had the capital to hold on. In a Peng's journey of 10,000 miles, it was an undead creature. Every time it died, it would be reborn with the blessing of the immortal rock, so it had nothing to be afraid of. De Peng regretted it very much. It should have used its own death to rebirth earlier to open up the situation for everyone, instead of letting the 2 ancestral shamans die in vain. In the end, because of its pride and disdain for the Eddie Earth orthodoxy, it had turned the situation into this. There was still a chance. It was immortal. When the swordsman was tired of killing, his anger would naturally dissipate. At that time, it could come back to negotiate. These swordsmen, they definitely wouldn't be able to achieve their goal this time. As long as they were alive, there would always be a chance. Moreover, these traitors of the winged people also needed to be dealt with properly. They couldn't deal with the rising power of the sword vein, but couldn't they deal with these things that were neither human nor bird? Even if it knew that it was no match for them, De Peng no longer thought about it. It would take this opportunity to learn the true strength of the swordsman. When it returned, it would have first-hand information, and it would have a target. Just now, when it was fighting with Chong Lu, it still had a little bit of defense. But now, it was forced into a desperate situation. Instead, it became unscrupulous. It put life and death outside of its mind. It attacked with every move. It didn't take its life seriously at all. This only made Lu Xiaoyi even more excited, because this could maximize the use of the sword-wielding technique he learned from Shi Zhao. This fierce battle made the winged people secretly smack their lips. The king of beasts really had a steel-like will. In such a desperate situation, it still didn't lose the demeanor of a cultivator. However, demeanor was just demeanor. It could not replace strength. Maybe it was because of the previous fight with Demon Lord, or maybe it was because Lu Dixing was more skillful than a senior brother. No matter what the reason was, after a few breaths, Da Peng's head was cut off and his soul returned to his body. He didn't seem to be dead. In this space, the great Peng had an immortal body. As soon as the bird's head was chopped off, there were fluctuations of life energy coming from the center of rock journey of 10,000 mile space. Before the 5 winged men could react, the 2 swordsmen had already disappeared. Knowing that they were going to eliminate the source of trouble, the five-winged men hurriedly followed. Although it was a little embarrassing to be a cheerleader, they had to know the outcome. Even if the winged tribe prided themselves on their speed, they still couldn't keep up with the swordsman's full speed. As he flew, he felt intense fluctuations in the aura in front of him. The collision of Tao realms rose and fell one after another. It was like a series of explosions that shook the space endlessly. When they finally arrived not far from the battlefield, they happened to see De Peng being beheaded again. But this time, the one who did it was Demon Lord. This wasn't a great cultivator's demeanor, but a life-and-death battle. Both swordsmen made their moves, but it was Demon Lord who finished them off. Here, they met another acquaintance, a lone swordsman. Shui Yu hurriedly pulled her to her side and complained, "Why are you running around? Don't you know it's dangerous? Your current situation. Forget it. I'll help you absorb the power of the Great Peng's blood first. Don't blame my third senior brother. He doesn't have much evil intentions. It's just that his brain isn't very good." The armored man frowned at the side, but he didn't say anything. Now that their positions were clear, it didn't matter whether they saved this female cultivator or not. Shui Yu was healing herself here, and the man above sighed. Two swordsmen fighting one. Isn't this a little inconsistent with the reputation of swordsmen in the universe's cultivation world? The armored man sneered. Swordsmen are always outnumbered, not because they like it or because they have a good demeanor, but because they have fewer people. In fact, they like to fight in groups the most. What reputation is there to talk about? The man above guessed. How many times do you think the Great Peng will be killed before it begs for mercy? The ordinary man snorted. As long as we're here, it won't beg. I'm afraid that's the real reason why you two came here to watch the show, right? The armored man laughed mischievously. You're the fastest one. These winged people actually had a very bad conscience. Since they had chosen to side, even if it wasn't obvious, they knew that the Great Peng wouldn't let them go after this. So they came here to watch the show, in fact, to watch the show. The Great Peng was the most prideful, especially in front of its mixed-blood descendants. How could it open its mouth? Only a dead Great Peng was a good Great Peng. In this space where the Great Peng traveled thousands of miles, it was hard to say what would happen to the Great Peng. But as long as there was a glimmer of hope, they weren't willing to let the Great Peng leave so easily. At the very least, they had to swear that they wouldn't harm it. This was their bottom line. This time, the Great Peng's resurrection point didn't move far away, but was under the archway, right in the center of the space. This made the swordsman's pursuit very easy. Cold, cruel, black-hearted, ruthless. The two swordsmen didn't care about any so-called fair opportunity. They didn't even give the Great Peng a chance to speak. After the Great Peng was completely resurrected with the support of immortal energy, what awaited it was endless sword light. Like two butchers in a slaughterhouse, again and again, there was no mercy, no weakness, and no sympathy. It was as if they could kill until the end of time. It was as if the Great Peng wasn't the king of beasts, nor was it a cultivation creature. It was just a target. After more than 10 deaths, even the hardened winged people could not bear to watch anymore. The vegetarians even closed their eyes, unwilling to watch any longer. However, the whistling of swords did not stop in the slightest. Under the illumination of the swords, two calm and indifferent faces appeared, as well as two mechanical discussions of pure technology. Your sword is a bit soft. The 5 elements twist can be sharper. The spatial tear doesn't seem to have much effect. It seems that the Great Peng's speed is largely related to the Tao of space. Perhaps we can control its speed in this aspect? The Great Peng doesn't have any special weaknesses. Its neck is very sturdy. When cutting it down, you need to use killing intent to cut off its life force. Otherwise, it will grow another head. Why don't we try the Tao of Valleys? Let's make it bloom from the center and have endless power. The winged ones, this was the first time they truly understood what a swordsman was. When you truly offended this orthodoxy, they would become a true demonic sect. They would use killing to stop killing to the extreme. It was no wonder that the immortal court was afraid of them. They didn't have the flexibility and compromise of the Taoists. But it was also a survival strategy. If there were fewer people, how much room for compromise would you have? Chapter 2265. The great rock did not open its mouth. It was not that it did not want to open its mouth, but that it did not have the chance to do so. To it, begging for mercy needed a way out. It could not shout like the wild boar, "My king, please spare my life." Therefore, it continued to kill. The normal person could not help but ask quietly, "Do they have other motives for doing this?" The normal person was the strongest here, and her foresight was also very unique. That's right. If you think that the swordsman is a musclehead, then it can only mean that he was taught a lesson in vain and did not learn anything. How could a person who could integrate his power into a battle and make a peak half immortal bow down to him not have a strategy? From what I see, the great rock's rebirth is not its own ability, but the self-painted portrait of Fu Xianpeng. Then, how much life energy could a painting provide for the rebirth of a king of beasts like the great rock? Therefore, could it be that the source of the life energy came from the immortal rock itself? Would the immortal rock endlessly sacrifice? Not necessarily, right? Therefore, the great rock could still die when the immortal rock gives up on it. Everyone listened to his analysis and felt that it was very reasonable. This should be the key to the great rock's rebirth. They could only see it now, but these two swordsmen could see it from the start. This was the difference, the huge difference. In a battle, if you had such eyesight and reaction, you would be able to get through most of the dangerous situations safely. However, some people had different opinions. The normal person felt that she could not pretend to be deaf and mute, because this might be related to their life and death. Although this was the first time she came into contact with a Xianyuan swordsman, she had some understanding of Liu Xiaoyi's personality, which made her even more aware of this guy's craziness. I think, isn't there another possibility? Since the portrait of Fu Xianpeng is the immortal rock's self-painted portrait, its relationship with the immortal rock is definitely not small. If the great rock continues to die like this, it might anger the immortal rock, and it might descend to the lower realm. In that case, were they doing this on purpose? Because their real goal is the glutton immortal? A deathly silence. This sounded like a fantasy, but who could guarantee that the swordsman would not do such a thing? Glutton immortal is really possible? It might not have been possible in the past, but might not be possible now. This was because before the end of the era, the immortals had always been cautious of their words and actions. If they descended to the lower realm now, the immortals would not only have to face two audacious swordsmen, but also the will of the heavenly Tao. Truth and falsehood, falsehood and falsehood. Regarding the immortal court and the immortals, who could say for sure? However, this was indeed in line with the style of the swordsman. If they wanted to eliminate the root of the problem, killing a great rock would not be enough. Even if the rock was the king of all beasts, it was impossible for it to mobilize 3 guardians of the night, including Taoism and Buddhism. This was not the rock's ability. The only one that could do this was the immortal rock. Superior Man laughed dryly. Why don't we stay a little further away? If the immortal rock really appears and orders us to do something, should we listen or not? Shui retorted, "How far is far? What was the point of hiding in the immortal rock space? Moreover, if the immortal rock really came to the lower realm and needed our help in battle, I don't think the immortal rock needs to support it. Let's do it here. At least we can see it with our own eyes. As for what to do next, it's not up to us to decide. Therefore, there's no need to think too much. In this storm, we're just bandits. Don't think too highly of ourselves." The 6 of them did not want this to be true. The swordsmen might not care, but they really did care. This also allowed them to truly understand their own position. They could just be bystanders during the change of eras, but they could forget about actually participating in it. Not to mention strength. Just this ambition alone was something that they would never be able to achieve. While they were still thinking about how to make a name for themselves in the origin world, how to build a good relationship with humans and demonic beasts, and how to count how many demonic beasts there were, the real main character had already started to try to become an immortal. This difference was like the difference between clouds and mud. The swordsman's reaction was still too late. Just as she finished speaking, the great rock was reborn again. However, this time, the rebirth was exceptionally slow. With the immortal chi surrounding it, it was impossible to interrupt or stop it. Everyone present was aware of this problem. However, some people were active, while others were passive. No one knew what would happen to the original great rock when the reborn species descended. Would it really die? Or would the immortal rock only borrow this body? Would there be any repercussions? This was a new question, and no one knew the correct answer. However, they were not the only ones who could sense the immortal rock's aura in the lower realm. The white tiger was stalling for time with great difficulty. After its previous rash advance, it was now very experienced. As an old tiger, it realized its own problem. Tens of thousands of years of dedicated cultivation had taught it the most correct way to do things, the most helpful way to its two juniors. The white tiger, who had been proud for tens of thousands of years, learned to endure. This was its greatest achievement. From this moment on, it finally jumped out of the shackles of the Killing Sword sect. If there was a future, it would definitely reach a higher level in swordsmanship. If the Killing Sword sect, which was always moving forward, learned to retreat, then it would reach a whole new level. Therefore, after receiving Lu Xiaoyi's sword message, it became more and more calm. This meant that the four Taoist attacks were becoming more and more difficult to deal with. The Taoists, on the other hand, showed their consistent style for millions of years. If they could not achieve a breakthrough, then they would just drag it out. Therefore, they were not the sword vein, nor the demonic rock, nor the Buddhist sect. One Taoist might be impulsive, such as Zhu Mingzi, who fought alongside the great rock. However, when four Taoists gathered together, they would not be impulsive. They would bring out the commonality between them to the extreme and then play a beautiful melody of attrition in resonance. Do not underestimate the word attrition. It contained too many profound meanings. It meant waiting, observing, weighing, and changing according to time, not sticking to the norm. It was this word that helped the Taoists become the most powerful force in the cultivation world after millions of years of changes in the power structure of the cultivation world. Demonic beasts always wanted to achieve success in one go. However, the Taoists were always 9 shallow and 1 deep. This was the difference between Taoists. It was in this 9 shallow and 1 deep that the Taoists finally found the variable they had been waiting for. The aura of an immortal descended, and the nature of this battle changed. There was no need for anyone to say it, and no need for anyone to remind them. Everyone tacitly agreed and silently felt it. The old white tiger clearly felt the aura. It roared and spat out the Dharma conch, which had returned to its original form, without saying anything. Then, without looking back, it ran towards the direction of the immortal's aura. That was where it should be, and no one could stop it. When a mutation happened, this was the tradition of the Xianyuan sword vein. Life and death together. Even if this disaster was caused by those two fellows who wished for the world to be in chaos. Once they entered the sword vein, they would not have a good ending. Chapter 2266. The Kunlun visitor and the other Taoists looked at each other. They had to come up with a plan. Hiding here and pretending to be dead was not going to work. In the Immortal Rock's self-painting space, was there any use in pretending to be dead? Immortal Rock descending to the lower realm is not appropriate. I see that there is a huge change in the development of this matter. The Kunlun visitor made his judgment. As the night watchman of the first heaven, Emperor Huang Xingtian, he understood the rules of the immortal court much better than others. That was why he said so. But among the 4 people here, there was one who had more right to speak than him. Simbai, a former immortal who was banished to the lower realm, had been slacking the whole time. As a former immortal, he did not show the strength that he should have. If he really took action, this battle would have ended long ago. Cheng Lu would not have been able to wait for Lu Xiaoyi, and Lu Xiaoyi would not have been able to wait for a normal person. But he was just slacking off here. He fought with a clear conscience, and naturally. He was probably the only one who knew what was going on behind the scenes. How much respect could you expect an immortal who was banished to the lower realm have for the immortal court? Maybe he was afraid of some restrictions and had no choice but to do it. But how to do it, and to what extent? Only he had the final say in this matter. That was what he did. It was the same as not doing anything. Let's all go and take a look. We can't hide, but we should be the same as the winged man. The law does not punish the majority. As for the immortal rock, regardless of whether it can achieve its goal in the lower realm, I am sure of one thing. It is finished. There will never be a place for it in the new era. He, the king of all beasts, there is no one left now. The four Taoists silently flew to the center, constantly judging the situation in their hearts. Things were clear. The monks were finished, and the miscellaneous troops had disappeared. Only the great rock was left there, bitterly holding on. That was why the immortal rock was enraged. The ship was about to capsize. As the few remaining guests, should they continue to scoop water to delay the sinking process? Or should they jump off the ship and swim to another new ship? Even if the new ship was smaller, it might not have a good position. There was only one word: waste. Waste until the sky was bright and the universe clear. They were very experienced in this. The descent of the great rock's rebirth point was still not complete. It couldn't be helped. Giving birth to a mortal baby might be fast, but giving birth to an immortal baby would be difficult. They were two completely different creatures, even if they were both rocks. If it was possible, the swordsman wouldn't mind killing it while it was still young, but they couldn't do it now. The pouring of immortal force wasn't a process they could influence. It wasn't just the immortal Peng itself. There were also some things related to great Tao laws. Therefore, he could only watch from the sidelines and see what kind of strange thing could be squeezed out. It just so happened that there was time for the final exchange. Not bad. Everyone was in good order. Everyone was fine. However, the topic was not on how to deal with this thing. There was no room for discussion because no one had any experience. Not to mention them. Even Xuanyuan's sword vein was once the most powerful existence. Li Wuya, after becoming an immortal, did not seem to have beaten an immortal. Of course, this was definitely not because he had become a Buddha after becoming an immortal. It was just that time was too tight and he did not have the time to do so. However, inexperience was inexperience. Right now, they were just chatting. If they didn't chat now, they might not have the chance in the future. The white tiger didn't have anything to say because its life was only sleeping. Lu Xiaoyi also didn't have anything to say because his life was too young. In front of Chong Lu, who had a lifespan of 20,000 years, and the white tiger, who had lived for hundreds of thousands of years, his story was not a story. It was like a preschooler's babbling. Only Chong Lu said calmly, "After cultivating for 20,000 years, it's fortunate to be able to fight an immortal. If I can't become an immortal, I'll settle for the next best thing. Being an immortal is also not bad." The white tiger said in a muffled voice, "You little kid, you talk as if you're very old. I feel that I'm still very young. How can you be old? If you can't become an immortal, you don't even have a confidence. What future do you have? I can't become an immortal because of the physique of a beast. What about you? Just because you're old?" Chong Lu sneered, "Old white, you're not a fish. How can you know the pain of fish? At my level, not a single one of my contemporaries is left. Even those Taoist virtuous paragons and Buddhist eminent monks who were good at maintaining their health are all gone. Only I, who focused on killing and didn't cultivate good karma, was able to survive until now." The white tiger was also very curious. "I'm also very curious. According to common sense, you should have died 5,000 years ago. How can you live until now? It's against the rules. Is there really such a miraculous elixir in the cultivation world that can increase one's lifespan to this extent? How come I've never heard of it? If there really is such a method and it's passed down, wouldn't the Xianyuan sword sect become an immortal sect?" Chonglu laughed. "No, my method can't be passed down to others. It's not a miraculous elixir. Even the alchemy saint can't refine it, let alone the alchemy saint of Xianyuan. In fact, it's a very special method." Combined with my own fortuitous encounter, it's completely a personal opportunity. As a result, I rubbed the past and future into the present, so I increased my lifespan by 5,000 years. This is also the limit. Lu Xiaoyi listened quietly. In fact, he understood that these two old men were deliberately saying it for him to hear. The meaning behind it made him helpless and sad. It felt like they were talking about their last words. They knew that he didn't want to listen, so they used this method. The white tiger suddenly realized, but he was somewhat puzzled. Rubbing the past and future into the present world? This is a new way. However, there are many disadvantages. If you fight with others, won't you have no past and future, so you can't be reborn? Chong Lu smiled proudly. Do I, a swordsman, need to be reborn? The three Qin seniors have never been reborn in their lives. Needless to say, senior brother, I've wandered the universe for 20,000 years and fought countless battles in my life. No one can kill my present world. So, what does it matter if I have a past and future as a backup for my rebirth? The white tiger rolled his eyes. Don't brag in front of me. But if you don't have a past and future, doesn't that mean you can't? Chong Lu smiled and was very open-minded. Yes. Without a past and future, I can't become an immortal. Because living for 5,000 years has completely overdrawn my future potential. This is the justice of the heavenly Tao. There's nothing to say. This is also my choice, and no one forced me. To be able to guard Xianyuan until the change of the era, to be able to see the emergence of the rising stars of the sect. I'm willing. The white tiger curled his lips. Xuanyuan's tradition was not so sentimental. They were more used to using ridicule to replace sadness. Just like now, they knew that Chong Lu would definitely not become an immortal, but they still didn't care. It's a good choice. That guy Li Wuya exhausted Xuanyuan's tens of thousands of years of luck. No matter who you are, with countless pairs of eyes of the immortal court watching, no one can become an immortal. This is inevitable, unless there's a change of era to reset the luck. If you prolong your life, you can't become an immortal, but you can still do something. If you don't prolong your life, you won't be able to see the collapse of the great Tao, so you can't talk about anything else. Chapter 2267. A man and a tiger's side. But the person who was listening passively didn't say a word. He didn't know what to say, so he might as well not say anything and let the two old guys sing a duet. White Tiger slapped his big head. I suddenly thought of something. If your past and future are gone, what about your reincarnation? I've studied 3 lives and 3 kills for many years, and it seems that you'll never be able to awaken in this case, and have no hope of returning to Xianyuan. Chong Lu smiled. I'm not Senior Sister Bullian. How can I have that ability? But Senior Sister has always done things for herself, regardless of other things. I reckon that after this era changes, there will be changes in the Tao of reincarnation. When that time comes, I won't be the only one who can't reincarnate. Everyone can't reincarnate. Since we can't reincarnate, I'm using my past and future to increase my lifespan. Isn't that a big advantage? White Tiger could not help but laugh. You rascal. So was Li Wuya who gave you pointers long ago, right? Too bad. Walking your own path and leaving others with no path to walk. And that's not bad. In the future, there will be fewer so-called daughters of the Son of Heaven, and everyone will be fairer. I say, Lu Xiaoyi, you've been listening for so long without saying a word. Are you pretending to be a mute? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. You're talking about sunset glow. Why should I, a Hatsune Miku, join the fun? Chong Lu said meaningfully. Not bad. You know your Chuin? As the saying goes, always be arrogant, always be prudent. It's very reasonable. Young people, the biggest problem is impulsiveness. Control your impulsiveness well, and you'll have a better future. Lu Xiaoyi continued to remain silent. He knew what the two old men meant. In fact, they were telling him that in the following battles, they would be the ones to be arrogant while he, Lu Xiaoyi, would have to be cautious and not take any risks. He couldn't agree. While the 3 of them were chatting, the thing at the reincarnation point finally took shape. At the same time, 4 more Taoists came from the cheerleading team outside. Together with the winged people, the 10 of them stopped at a distance, waiting for the thrilling moment. There were countless immortals descending to the lower realm in the history of the universe's cultivation. It wasn't anything new. However, most of the time, they would secretly descend to the lower realm. They would not use guns. They would never create too much of a commotion, nor would they directly participate in disputes. Generally, they would roam, feel the universe, experience the changes in the weather, play in the mortal world, and enjoy a leisurely life. At most, they would leave some ambiguous and specious clues in a certain scene, holding a dispensable attitude, and set up some trends for the future thousands or tens of thousands of years. Only in this way could the connection between one's karma and the origin world be minimized, and the changes in the origin world would not affect one's cultivation. Going down to the lower realm in a hurry and brandishing a butcher's knife was not something an immortal should do. Evil retribution would descend. Of course, now that the universe was changing and the era was changing, the immortals could not even protect themselves. Therefore, some of the rules had become much weaker. They still had some influence, but it was hard to grasp. Everyone wanted to take advantage of the chaos to rise up. This was what everyone wanted. Mortals were like this, cultivators were like this, and even immortals were no different. It was to take advantage of the situation. It depended on the immortals' understanding of the heavenly Tao. A great rock slowly flapped its wings in the radiance of immortal power. It seemed no different from the previous great rock, but its 7 colored wings exposed its truth. It was a simple judgment. After being reborn for so long, it couldn't just be the sinking of its consciousness, right? It must have been a transformation of its body. Then, as an immortal rock, in what aspect did its strength show? Where was its weakness? This was what everyone was most concerned about. From afar, Senbai sneered. It's an immortal rock, but it's not an immortal rock. If it was a real immortal rock descending to the lower realm, it wouldn't have to go through so much trouble. Leaving something in the immortal court can help it avoid some unnecessary trouble. This may be the only way it can choose. One thing is certain, it's definitely not as powerful as a real immortal rock. Whether or not we can kill it depends on whether the swordsman is determined enough and whether they dare to pay the price. If they dare, there may be a 10% chance. Taoist Hua Hai shook his head. Pay the price? It depends on what price you can get. Is there any meaning in just killing and indulging? Even if these swordsmen kill the immortal rock, what can it prove? That half-immortals are stronger than immortals? Or that the immortal court won't dare to make any more moves? Nothing. Nothing at all. Apart from the fear of the higher-ups and the possible harsher suppression in the future, this kind of battle is meaningless. Old Woman Phone was calm and unruffled. Whether it's meaningful or not has nothing to do with us. Actually, this is the best result for us. It saves us from falling too deep. I can't see the situation of the universe clearly anymore. The wind is moving, the clouds are moving, and the stars are moving, but the heart can't move. It's easier said than done. If you don't want to be drowned by the tide, you have to at least stay away from the eye of the storm. The Kunlun visitor frowned. Under the tide, no one can stay safe. There's no eye of the storm, because there are eyes of the storm everywhere. If you're not good at swimming, you'd better hug a big piece of wood. Looking at the winged man group, he sneered. Of course, if you hug the wrong person, you might just hug a rock. These people were not so slow that they were unaware of the changes in the universe. The change of the epoch, the collapse of the great Tao. There was no cultivator who couldn't feel it. However, the problem was who should lead this trend, and everyone had their own opinions. To these so-called orthodox cultivators, they couldn't tolerate cultivators other than Taoists and Buddhists deciding the future trend. This was the fundamental reason why they responded to the summons. In fact, this was the mainstream thinking in the cultivation world. The problem wasn't whether to change or not, but who would lead this change. Therefore, they were very dissatisfied with the winged man group, who hugged their thighs whenever they could. Senbai was one of the more broad-minded and open-minded ones among these people. He had his own reasons for coming here this time. Of course, it was also for his own future so he could see further. There's something very strange. As everyone knows, rock journey of 10,000 miles should be a sealed energy space. All the energy shouldn't escape. If a half-immortal cultivator dies in this space, the dissipated energy should be absorbed by rock journey of 10,000 miles. The direct result is that the space that we compressed previously will inevitably expand because of the addition of this energy. Somebody looked at the wingman group. Am I right? The few wingman group looked at each other. Finally, the superior one came out to answer. Yes, it should be like this. Although we can't completely control rock journey of 10,000 miles, in terms of mechanism, this is a sealed energy space. Senpai nodded and looked at everyone. Since it's a sealed energy space, energy should be conserved. In that case, how many half-immortals had died in this place? 4 monks, 2 Taoists, and 2 Earth Immortals. Where did the energy of the half-immortals go after they died? From the beginning to the end, I didn't feel rock journey of 10,000 miles expanding at all. Did it just disappear into thin air? Chapter 2268. Everyone also realized that something was wrong, but no one could guess the reason. The rules had lost their effect. Energy was no longer conserved. Senpai said softly, I have always been guessing who is the mastermind behind this sword vein hunting operation. My experience has determined that my horizons may be wider than all of you, so there are actually some things that are very wrong. As far as I know, the immortal rock is only at the level of a human immortal in the immortal court. Its physical strength is not bad, but it is not worth mentioning in the Tao realm. Of course, I am referring to the level of an immortal, not someone like us. What is bad is its connections. The immortal rock has always been arrogant and conceited. This is its innate temperament, and it is understandable. However, this temperament may make others feel like they are looking up to a mountain in the origin world. But in the immortal court, who can get used to this heaven's chosen rock? Seeing that everyone was listening attentively, he continued, all of us have different ways of obtaining information. This is your secret. Who did you get it through? Who is the messenger? Which force is behind it? In the origin world, all of you are at the top of the hierarchy, especially the few night watchers. If there is no one above you, how can you get this position? They are not ordinary people who come and go as they wish. They belong to different circles. Taoists and Buddhists do not tolerate each other, and they are not related to the filth soil. However, to be able to gather these people means that it is not ordinary. That represents connections in different circles. To do this, most human immortals would not be able to do it, let alone an arrogant and conceited feathered beast. Everyone was a little confused. It was fine if these things were not mentioned, but in fact, when they thought about it carefully, everyone had a confused account in their hearts. With the immortal rock's arrogance, it might bow in front of Taoists and Buddhists, but how could it bow in front of filth soil? Even in Taoists and Buddhists, there were many peaks, and each had their own circle. Just like the 7 Taoists, they were not familiar with each other. How could these people be grouped together? If it was just the immortal rock's appeal, it would be a joke. Therefore, there must be someone else involved in this matter in the immortal court. Senpai was indeed a former immortal. He did not overdo it and change the topic. These speculations can never be explained clearly, so there's no need to investigate it in detail. We can't afford to. He only talked about the consequences. Back to the original reason why he came here, even if everyone thought it was just an excuse. Senpai's eyes were sharp. Zerg is red. If this space was connected to another space, and if the life energy of the half-immortal's death was absorbed by the other space, and there were some strange things hidden in the other space, then wouldn't it lead to a real flood? That's the real reason I'm here. Every man for himself, and the devil takes the hindmost. To be honest, if I can eliminate such a disaster for the human race, it will be of great help to my karma, and it will only be good for all of you. Therefore, I don't care how they kill me. I only care about what might happen after that. Since we are all here, these changes are related to us. It doesn't matter if you're a winged person or a Taoist who is watching from the sidelines. Unless you don't come, you will have to take responsibility for everything that happens here. This is the problem we should be concerned about. Everyone was shocked. Although this was only a deduction, it came from the mouth of Tsenbai, who was once an immortal. Coupled with some vague clues, it was full of room for imagination. From this, one could imagine how complicated the power struggle in the immortal court had become. There were countless motives behind a single action, and countless immortals were involved. The most unacceptable thing was that even the people present did not know which circle they belonged to. Which camp? What did they come here for? Was it more important to kill the Sorvain? Or was it more important to eliminate Zerge Red? It seemed like both were more important. 8 half-immortals had already died. They were only one step away from the legendary Red Flood that required 9 half-immortals' life energy. No matter if it was the 3 swordsmen's death or the immortal rock's death, there would be a lot of life energy left. In other words, if there really was such a space connected to the winged sky, and Zerg's egg star was accumulating energy, no matter who won or lost, everything would be unavoidable. Under everyone's worried gazes, the immortal energy protecting the revival point finally began to fade away. The immortal rock also appeared in front of everyone in one piece. Rainbow-colored wings, scissor tail, sharp claws, curved beak, cold and powerful eyes filled the entire space with the aura of a king descending to the world. Just as everyone was waiting for the immortal rock to speak, 3 sword lights slashed down from the sky. This was the difference. People were always respectful towards those in a higher position. However, the swordsmen did not care about this. They only judged. Enemy? Friend? Friend, good wine. Enemy, fast sword. What was there to say? Could it be that he could use his mouth to talk the immortal rock back after it came down with great difficulty? Even if I use my Xinyuan sword, I will send you to heaven. The White Tiger's sword came the fastest. Because it was the killing sword lineage, it did not care about the so-called gathering of sword lights. The important thing was that it was fast. It was too much for the eye to take in. However, the position was a little awkward. It was right under the immortal rock's scissor-like tail, a furry and unspeakable area. This was not a casual position to attack. This kind of battle between mortals and immortals would not give you enough time to test the waters and explore. By the time you understood and attacked the whole body and finally found a weak spot, the 3 corpses would have turned cold. Therefore, you had to be direct and go straight to the point, explode, and fight to the death. If you stopped, you would die. Among the 3 of them, the White Tiger understood the Great Rock better than his 2 seniors. 20,000 years ago, he had a long and difficult battle with the half-immortal Great Rock. It was a true century, but it was a century for mortals, a full 100 years. Therefore, in terms of understanding, no one was more familiar than him. Later, he met Li Wuya, who came from the Heaven's Choice continent, and the 2 of them had a serious discussion. Although Li Wuya did not have the experience of fighting a great rock, he had the experience of fighting a phoenix. Both of them had discovered that these 2 kings of beasts, who were both winged beasts, had a common weakness. Of course, this weakness was only relative. You could never achieve your goal by attacking the great rock's sturdiest head, wings, and claws. This was not the judgment of a swordsman. It was the judgment of the 4 most outstanding swordsmen of the 3 generations. This was the place, the winding path to the secluded place, the place where the 5 grains were reincarnated. Although it was a little wretched, how could they be picky when the battle began? Of course, they would go for the soft spots. Chapter 2269. The White Tiger's flying sword was extremely fast. However, it was slightly lacking in power. A white light flashed from the tail feathers of the immortal rock, and such an attack ended in failure. Even the great Peng, a half-immortal, could not tolerate such humiliation and disrespect, let alone the immortal Peng. However, before it could express its anger, before it had the chance to speak its mind, before the immortal Peng's posture of descending to the lower realm, the first sword light slashed down almost at the same time, followed by the second and third. Chong Lu's sword, without the Tao realm, it was just a superposition of the highest potential of elemental energy. There was a principle between immortals and mortals. Mortals couldn't develop the Tao realm in front of immortals. This had nothing to do with how deep your understanding of the Tao was or whether the Tao realm targeted you. There was only one thing that mattered: the difference between immortals and mortals. For immortals who had the past, present, and future, they were all existences who had fused with the Tao. No matter what Tao they fused with, it didn't matter if it was Xiantian or postnatal. The most important thing was that they fused with the Tao. For cultivators who hadn't become immortals, their understanding of Tao stopped at comprehension, understanding, learning, and controlling. However, they would never be able to fuse, because once you fused with the Tao, you would become an immortal. This was the fundamental difference. No matter how deep your understanding of the Xiantian Tao was, it was meaningless in front of immortals who fused with the Tao. Therefore, it couldn't be used and it couldn't be used. It was like displaying one slight skill in front of an expert, like showing off one's skills in front of an expert. Fortunately, the immortal rock didn't completely descend to the lower realm because it had to leave a part of its body in the immortal court to guard and fool the immortal court to show that it was abiding by the rules. The result of this was that it chose to leave behind the Tao realm incarnation of the immortal rock to deal with the heavenly Tao's gaze. However, it projected its physical body and pure bloodline power down. This was the most suitable choice. Because the heavenly Tao valued the Tao realm the most, the incarnation left behind in the Tao realm could shut the mouths of others. No one could say that it really descended to the lower realm. Similarly, its strength was its bloodline and physical body. It was the most suitable for it to descend to fight and kill. Therefore, there was such a distribution. On this point, Senbai's judgment was very accurate. The three swordsmen also made the same judgment. If the immortal rock's complete form descended to the lower realm, there would be no meaning to fight. This was the basic principle of the three-man attack. Do it according to the most likely path, and never change your mind. Demon Lord Sword was not completely divided, because there wasn't enough time. From a moment the celestial energy barrier around the immortal rock's body was opened up, the time had been calculated. By the time his sword lights were fully formed, spread out, and condensed into one sword, it would be enough for the immortal rock to flap its wings and disappear without a trace. It would be harder than ascending to the heavens to attack with its tail. It was also unrealistic to set up the sword river in advance, because the immortal rock would be more vigilant after discovering their intention to attack. It would not have the intention to listen to the leader's speech. There would be no suddenness. All of this had extremely profound tactical considerations. The reason why their swords could become the best in Xianyuan was not because they were hot-blooded and impulsive. Therefore, the strategy of the three of them was to attack in sequence and not give the immortal rock any time to react. In terms of physical strength, the White Tiger wasn't even on the same level. Therefore, they couldn't afford to drag this out. The longer they dragged on, the slimmer their chances were. Demon Lord could transform into 3 million sword lights, but now he only had time to transform into 1 million sword lights. Then he gathered them into one sword and followed the White Tiger's sword trace to cut the fluff. This time there was a slight effect, because it had just repelled the White Tiger's swift and violent sword. It was somewhat lacking in defense against the Demon Lord's heavy sword. A layer of the fluff was scraped off by the sword chi, but it still didn't injure the main body. The fluff could be regenerated very quickly through the power of the bloodline. But this kind of injury was still unacceptable to the immortal rock, especially in this kind of place, using this kind of method. Finally, it was Lu Xiaoyi's flying sword. Because the two seniors were buying time for him, his sword lights were very diverse. 9 million sword lights were already the full extent of his explosive potential. Then, he gathered them into one sword, displaying his understanding of sword speed and sword force since he started cultivating to the extreme. Similarly, He didn't have any Tao realm. Following closely behind the demon lord's flying sword, he chopped down. The three swordsmen's sword lights were separated by only an instant. It was as if a meteor was striking at the same place, the unspeakable lands. This strike finally drew blood. Under the opening of the first two sword lights, the defense of the fine fluff was suppressed to the lowest level, but Lu Xiaoyi's flying sword was the strongest among the three. The two sides matched, breaking through the defense. Lu Xiaoyi felt that his sword was completely transformed from the physical seven-ant. If it was placed in the void of the universe, it wouldn't have any problem piercing through a large planet, maybe even a string of them. But in front of the immortal rock's tyrannical body, it still wasn't enough. Less than a foot into the unspeakable place, he couldn't advance any further. He had two choices: leave the sword in the unspeakable place and continue to drill in. He estimated that the effect would be very limited. Without speed and Tao realm, even if he transformed into a drill, it would be very difficult to drill in. Or he could just retreat, protect the seven-ant, and prepare for the next attack. This time, he used a very rare physical external sword attack, not sword chi, so the seven-ant itself was in danger of being taken away. He chose to retreat. In a short moment, after it appeared, it was still thinking about how to teach these sword lunatics who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth a lesson, and then kill the chicken to warn the monkey so that its distant bloodline would be more obedient. But it didn't expect that in the blink of an eye, before it could even say a word, its back orifice would be attacked 3 times. It scuttled forward in pain, and the seven-ant just happened to retreat. With 2 strikes, a section of bloody intestines was pulled out. Why was it pulled out? Because Lu Xiaoyi's sword wasn't in the form of a normal flying sword, but a Wu Go. It had long barbs. The further the immortal rock fled, the more intestines came out. But its body was abnormally strong. Even its intestines were stronger than old vines. It was incomparably tough. The rock's cry shook the sky. Blood mist filled the air. The 3 sword lights were like 3 poisonous snakes, following the blood unyieldingly. The 3 of them stood in a classic triangular cone, attacking one. There would definitely be 2 behind it. The flying sword didn't care about the other parts of the immortal rock. It only focused on one point, try to dig deeper, bigger, and pull out more intestines. How long were the immortal rock's intestines? No one had an accurate description, but now they knew it was really long. It was also possible that while it was being dug out, it was growing. The 10 onlookers were dumbstruck, their bodies cold. Everyone, without exception, couldn't help but clamp their legs together, as if a demon would drill in at any time. They had imagined many battle scenarios, all kinds. But no matter how rich their imagination was, they couldn't think of such a method. There was actually such a disgusting person. Chapter 2270. The 3 swordsmen were not relaxed, because they were now facing the immortal rock's deadly pursuit. There was only one target to kill. The Wugo killer, Lu Xiaoyi. No wonder the immortal rock hated him. Even the 10 spectators were gnashing their teeth in hatred. Was there anyone more vicious than him in the cultivation world? If you want to use a sword, then use a sword. But you actually turned into a Wugo killer. This was premeditated. Lu Xiaoyi no longer had the chance to use Qi as a flying sword. He could only hold it in his hand and fight the immortal rock at close range. Other swords would break at the slightest touch. Only Qi was able to hold on. He continued to attack and did not give in. Even if his body was almost torn to pieces, it did not stop him from counterattacking. He did not know how to defend. Xin Yuan did not teach him. Shi Zhao did not teach him. He did not teach himself either. This time, the immortal rock had really pushed him to the limit of his close-range skills. The good news was that his skills were not bad. In theory, if he was hit by the immortal rock, he could also cut it with his sword. But the problem was that every time the immortal rock hit him, his muscles and bones would be injured. His internal organs would be damaged, and his meridians would be damaged. On the other hand, his counterattack could only leave a wound on the immortal rock's body. The blood flow could not keep up with the healing speed. He did not lose in terms of skills, but in terms of body. That was a huge gap that could not be crossed. It was the difference between man and beast. It was the difference between an immortal and a mortal that could not be made up. How long could he last in this situation? It could only be calculated in breaths. Moreover, the immortal rock could not change its target at this time. It hated this swordsman to the bone. This was the greatest shame in its millions of years of life. Only death could wash away this humiliation. Demon Lord and White Tiger finally had the opportunity to attack from the back. Because the wounds had been opened, their attacks were very effective. But no matter how effective they could never be faster than the Immortal Rock's attack. The Immortal Rock's death could be calculated in seconds, but Lu Xiaoyi's being torn to pieces could only be calculated in breaths. Before the battle, the two old men had hinted that this battle should be fought by them and leave the future to the young people. But the wish was good, but the reality was not as good as one's wish. The young man was even more vicious than the old man. This made the two old men feel relieved, but at the same time, they began to feel depressed. It seemed that they had no other good way to draw the hatred towards them. There was really no way to stop him. That's because you can't imagine a more vicious way of fighting than this. Demon Lord glanced at White Tiger and said coolly, "My lifespan is short, so I should go first." White Tiger was silent. This was a tacit understanding between them. Demon Lord didn't have much time left. This was the end he wanted. As a swordsman, this was his right. If Demon Lord doesn't succeed, then it will be White Tiger's turn. If it doesn't succeed, then it will disappear. Demon Lord's heart was calm. 20,000 years of cultivation flashed by. There was pleasure, regret, determination, and reluctance. But this was what he wanted. His lifespan was truly running out. At his level, he had a very clear understanding of this. It was only 100 years, so he needed a chance to be unbridled. A worthy opponent. Immortal Rock? Just barely. Therefore, killing Depeng this time also had a certain element in it, which was intentional. Originally, he thought that he could stand in front and let the young man make a name for himself. But now, it seems that the plan has changed. The young man will stand in front, and he, the old man, will make a name for himself. Very good. A swordsman dying from an attack is the end result. He had a skill which was actually related to the way he increased his lifespan. His lifespan was obtained by merging the past and the future. But in fact, the ultimate goal of this method was to merge the present world with it, all for the sake of exploding the most brilliant sword in his life. There were many other reasons, but there was no need to go into detail. Making people sad was not the style of a swordsman. The heavens treated him well. First, there was senior brother Li Ji, and then there was junior brother Lu Xiaoyi. They were all dragons among men. They allowed him to live freely without worries, and he didn't have to worry about the things after his death. Having no worries was actually the greatest happiness of a cultivator. Maybe it wasn't as earth-shattering as senior brother, but for a swordsman, it was also a perfect life. The method is very novel, and the effect is very obvious. But to achieve the goal, it's still lacking something. The swordsman has miscalculated. If the three swordsmen fail this time, the Xinyuan sword faction will be in big trouble. Senbai commented, "It has always been a meaningless struggle. Only a swordsman would think like this. They are indeed worthy of the responsibility of a cultivator's orthodoxy. But this kind of responsibility is destined to be unsustainable." The Kunlun visitor was also not optimistic. Is it going to end? He's still so arrogant, just like Li Wuya in the past. It's a pity that you don't have Li Wuya's strength. Shuiyu muttered, "Am I going to become an undead too?" Surin softly muttered to herself. She did not have much experience in a battle, but she could see that although the Immortal Rock was in a difficult situation, the three swordsmen were more dangerous. White Tiger was also preparing its 100,000 years of demonic power. It was lucky to be able to live and die with such companions. In its 100,000 years of life as a mutated beast, its luck was not bad. It had a worthy sect and countless hot-blooded swordsmen. It was very happy, and it was worth it. As for whether or not it could see the end of the era, it was meaningless to it who could not become an immortal. What did the glory of others have to do with it? Lu Xiaoyi was still struggling. He had never realized that the body was so important to a cultivator. Unfortunately, it was a little too late for him to realize it now. In his short life of cultivation, he had never met an opponent that he could not kill with one strike. This was not a problem with the sword, but a problem with the body. But he was still fearless. In his attack on the immortal rock, the seemingly messy and crisscrossing sword marks were actually a sword formation that could summon the heavenly tribulation. The heavenly tribulation Dao was the only new Dao that could ignore the Dao integration stage. However, his immersion in this Dao was still too short. It was so short that he could not use it in front of the immortal rock. He could only use the sword formation. He still needed a few more marks to complete. He did not know if he had enough time. This immortal rock's recovery ability was too freakish. Many of the sword marks that he had just drawn on the immortal rock's body recovered in the blink of an eye. He had no choice but to start all over again. This was very time-consuming, but he still believed that as long as he persevered, there would be rewards. Chong Lu's head trembled, but this time, the flying sword circled around his body one more time. His lower dantian, middle dantian, upper dantian, everything, including his essence energy, spirit, and essence energy, instantly lost their vitality and crystallized after the flying sword circle around. Then it flew out gently. It did not look conspicuous, but it pierced into the depths of the immortal rock's body from an indescribable place. It went deeper and farther than Lu Xiaoyi's sword. It completely pierced through, and even the immortal rock's heart was sliced in half. However, this was still not enough to take the immortal rock's life. Its powerful life force was still tenacious even after suffering such a heavy blow. It was still recovering rapidly, but it slowed down the immortal rock's movements by a few beats. The white tiger began to inject its demonic power. It was its turn. At this moment, a purple lightning bolt struck down from the sky. The power contained in it was not something that humans could reach. It was simply tailor-made for the immortal rock by the heavenly Tao. This time, the immortal rock could no longer hold on. All the immortal blood in its body was evaporated by the lightning. There were no longer any signs of life. It was like a specimen that rapidly withered. Chong Lu smiled and raised his head to look in the direction of the blue sky. When the wind blew, his entire body turned into dust, leaving not a trace. Chapter 2271. The three swordsmen were not relaxed, because they were now facing the deadly pursuit of the immortal rock. There was only one target to kill: Wugo killer Lu Xiaoyi. No wonder the immortal rock hated him. Even the 10 onlookers were gnashing their teeth in hatred. Was there anyone more vicious than him in the cultivation world? If you want to use a sword, then use a sword. But you actually turn into a Wugo killer. This was premeditated. Lu Xiaoyi no longer had the chance to use Qi as a flying sword. He could only hold it in his hand and fight the immortal rock at close range. Other swords could not be used. They would break with a touch. Only Qi was able to hold on. He was still attacking and did not give in. Even if his body was almost torn to pieces, it could not stop his counterattack. He did not know how to defend. Xin Yuan did not teach him. Shi Zhao did not teach him. He did not teach himself either. This time, the immortal rock had really pushed him to the limit of his close-range skills. The good news was that his skills were not bad. In theory, if he took a hit from the immortal rock, he could also slash the immortal rock. But the problem was that every hit from the immortal rock could hurt his muscles and bones. His internal organs were damaged, and his meridians were damaged. His counterattack could only leave a wound on the immortal rock's body. The blood flow could not keep up with the healing speed. He did not lose in terms of skills, but he lost in terms of body. That was a huge gap that could not be crossed. It was the difference between man and beast. It was the difference between immortals and mortals that could not be made up. How long could he last in this situation? It could only be calculated in terms of breaths. Moreover, the immortal rock could not change its target at this time. It hated the swordsman to the bone. It was the greatest shame in its millions of years of life. Only death could wash away this shame. Chong Lu and White Tiger finally had the opportunity to attack from the back. Because the wounds were opened, their attacks were very effective. But no matter how effective they could never be faster than the immortal rock's attack. The immortal rock's death could be calculated in terms of breaths, but Lu Xiaoyi's death could only be calculated in terms of breaths. Before the battle, the two old men had hinted that this battle should be fought by them and leave the future to the young people. But the wish was good, but the reality was not as good as one's wish. The young man was even more vicious than the old man. This made the two old men feel relieved, but at the same time, they began to feel depressed. It seemed that they had no other good way to draw the hatred towards them. There was really no way to stop him. That's because you can't imagine a more vicious way of fighting than this. Demon Lord glanced at White Tiger and said coolly, "My lifespan is short, so I should go first." White Tiger was silent. This was a tacit understanding between them. Demon Lord didn't have much time left. This was the end he wanted. As a swordsman, this was his right. If Demon Lord doesn't succeed, then it will be White Tiger's turn. If it doesn't succeed, then it will disappear. Demon Lord's heart was calm. 20,000 years of cultivation flashed by. There was pleasure, regret, determination, and reluctance. But this was what he wanted. His lifespan was truly running out. At his level, he had a very clear understanding of this. It was only 100 years, so he needed a chance to be unbridled. A worthy opponent. Immortal Rock? Just barely. Therefore, killing De Peng this time also had a certain element in it, which was intentional. Originally, he thought that he could stand in front and let the young man make a name for himself. But now, it seems that the plan has changed. The young man will stand in front, and he, the old man, will make a name for himself. Very good. A swordsman dying from an attack is the end result. He had a skill that was actually related to the way he increased his lifespan. His lifespan was obtained by fusing the past and the future. But in fact, the ultimate goal of this method was to fuse the present world with it, all for the sake of exploding the most brilliant sword in his life. There were many other reasons, but there was no need to go into detail. Making people sad was not the style of a swordsman. The heavens had treated him well. In the past, he had his senior apprentice brother Li Ji, and in the future, he had his junior apprentice brother Lu Xiaoyi. They were both dragons among men. They allowed him to live his life without any worries, and he didn't have to worry about the matters after his death. Having no worries was actually the greatest happiness of a cultivator. Maybe it wasn't as earth-shattering as senior brother, but for a swordsman, it was also a perfect life. The method is very novel, and the effect is very obvious. But to achieve the goal, it's still lacking something. The swordsman has miscalculated. If the three swordsmen fail this time, the Xinyuan sword faction will be in big trouble. Senbai commented, "It was a meaningless struggle in the first place. Only swordsmen would think this way. They are indeed worthy of the responsibility of a cultivator's orthodoxy, but this kind of responsibility is destined to be unsustainable." The Kunlun visitor was also not optimistic. Is it going to end? It's still so arrogant, just like Li Wuya in the past. It's a pity that you guys don't have Li Wuya's strength. Shuiyu muttered, "Am I going to become an undead too?" Surin softly muttered to herself. She did not have much experience in the battle, but she could see that although the immortal rock was in a difficult situation, the three swordsmen were more dangerous. White Tiger was also preparing. It was preparing its 100,000 years of demonic power. It was lucky to be able to live and die with such companions. In its 100,000 years of life as a mutated beast, its luck was not bad. It had a worthy sect and countless hot-blooded swordsmen. It was very happy. It was worth it. As for whether it could see the end of the era, it was meaningless to it who could not become an immortal. What did the glory of others have to do with it? Lu Xiaoyi was still struggling. He had never realized that the body was so important to a cultivator. Unfortunately, it was already too late to realize it now. In his short cultivation life, he had never met an opponent that he could not defeat with one strike. This was not a problem with the sword, but a problem with the body. But he was still fearless. In his attack on the immortal rock, the seemingly messy and crisscrossing sword marks were actually a sword formation that could summon the heavenly tribulation. The heavenly tribulation Tao was the only Tao that could ignore the Tao convergence Tao. However, his understanding of this Tao was still too short. It was so short that he could not use it in front of the immortal rock. He could only use the sword formation. He still needed a few more strikes to complete. He did not know if he had enough time. The immortal rock's recovery ability was too freakish. Many of the sword marks that he had just drawn recovered in the blink of an eye. He had no choice but to start over again. This was very time-consuming, but he still believed that as long as he persevered, there would be rewards. Chong Lu's head trembled. However, this time, the flying sword circled around his body once more. His lower dantian, middle dantian, and upper dantian. Everything, including his essence energy, spirit, and essence energy, instantly lost their vitality after the flying sword circled around. Then it flew out gently. It seemed inconspicuous, but it pierced into the depths of the immortal rock's body. It pierced deeper and farther than Lu Xiaoyi's sword. It completely pierced through, including the immortal rock's heart. However, this was still not enough to take the immortal rock's life. Its powerful life force was still tenacious even after suffering such a heavy blow. It was still recovering rapidly, but it slowed down the immortal rock's movements by a few beats. The white tiger began to inject its demonic power. It was its turn. At this moment, a purple lightning bolt struck down from the sky. The power contained in it was not something that humans could reach. It was simply tailor-made for the immortal rock by the heavenly Tao. This time, the immortal rock could no longer hold on. All the immortal blood in its body was evaporated by the lightning. There was no longer any sign of life. It was like a specimen, rapidly withering. Chong Lu revealed a smile. He raised his head and looked in the direction of the blue sky. As the wind blew, his entire body turned into dust, leaving not a trace. Chapter 2272. There was no Tao phenomenon. Under the heavenly tribulation, the energy disappeared without a trace. Chong Lu's final attack had already extracted all the essence in his body. He used his life to create the final attack, giving Lu Xiaoyi the opportunity to transform the heavenly tribulation. The immortal rock's physical body in the lower realm suffered a fatal blow. Just as its immortal spirit was about to return to the immortal court, it suddenly lost its sense of direction when the immortal spirit pierced through the 10,000 miles of space and ascended upwards. It should have a way back. That was its Tao realm incarnation in the immortal court. But now it couldn't feel it, because that trace of emptiness seemed to have sunk into the netherworld, making it unable to distinguish between up and down. Without the support of its physical body, even the immortal Peng couldn't hold on for long. It ran back and forth in a daze, in a dilemma. Under the will of the heavenly Tao, the power of the immortal Peng became weaker and weaker. Until the last moment before it disappeared, it finally understood what had happened. Ghost Constellation, you and I have no enmity. Why do you want to consign me to eternal damnation? The space of rock soaring 10,000 miles was originally drawn by the immortal rock. When the immortal rock collapsed, the space of rock soaring 10,000 miles naturally collapsed. The restrictive power contained within suddenly spread out, causing the original wings spreading heaven to be smashed into pieces. Wings spreading heavens was originally a space created by immortal Peng. When immortal Peng was annihilated, the barrier of winged men for nearly 1,000,000 years, wings spreading heavens, no longer existed. Not everyone was aware of this problem. including the hundreds of thousands of winged men and wings spreading heavens, and the human cultivators in Front Star. None of them were aware of the soundless change in space. If nothing happened, it might take some time for the news to be thoroughly confirmed and spread. However, the peak half-immortals in wings, spreading heavens, all felt this change without exception. But they had an even more troublesome problem. The three swordsmen used the infamous gouge tactic to kill Immortal Peng. In order to kill Immortal Peng, Demon Sword Zone Lu used a forbidden power. It was also thanks to him that the Immortal Peng had to deal with the internal injuries, which gave Lu Xiaoyi precious time to complete the Heavenly Tribulation sword formation. Now that the dust had settled, the young swordsman who was covered in rock blood stared at them with a pair of brutal eyes. The murderous intent in his eyes seemed to have solidified. Ant was still dripping blood in his hand. No one doubted that the rampaging swordsman would not be a match for the remaining four Taoists. After all, who would dare to fight against them after witnessing how they slayed the immortal rock? Even the person who thought she was the most familiar with Lu Xiaoyi did not say anything, because she understood that this was not a matter of persuasion. Something big was about to happen. The only good news was that rock journey of 10,000 miles of space was no longer there, and wingspread sky was no longer there. Everyone could let go of their legs and run, but who knew how many would be able to escape? However, there were also smart ones who understood the way to transfer the marriage. Senpai coughed lightly. Zerg's red flood has begun. Yes, his guess was not wrong. The winged sky was not a completely independent large space. In fact, there was a small space that was connected to it, but even the winged people did not know the existence of it. There was a saying in the universe cultivation world called the Pearl Embryo Space. Who created this subspace? Was it the immortal rock? Or was it the secret means of other immortals? These secrets had already died with the immortal rock and could no longer be revealed in broad daylight. However, the reality was that Zerg's egg star did exist in this subspace. It had absorbed the life energy of many immortals and even the immortal rock in this battle, and had already reached the level of activating the red flood. White Tiger came to Lu Xiaoyi's side and wrapped his arm around his shoulder. "Little E, calm down." Lu Xiaoyi had been restraining himself, trying to suppress the uncontrollable bloody thoughts in his heart. Even if he knew that these four Taoists were actually just four lackeys running errands, and even they themselves might not know what they were doing, but he still wanted to kill, just to relieve the sadness in his heart. He did not expect that his meeting with Chong Lu would be an eternal farewell, and in such a way. White Tiger's spiritual sense was urgent. Actually, we all knew. We knew from the beginning. You also understand what we are talking about. Chong Lu had no time. This was his final destination. He chose it himself to kill the immortals, and he was very satisfied with this result. He deliberately killed the great Peng and lured the immortal rock to the lower realm. Of course, I also did it on purpose. You did the same. Then, what is there to be angry about? Isn't this the final destination of the Xian Yuan swordsman? We did this not only for Chong Lu. It was also for Xian Yuan. Everyone, starting from the great Emperor Li Wuya, Chong Lu, and possibly you and me in the future. We must make everyone's departure worthwhile. The living cannot act impulsively. It's all over. The problem now is Zerg's red flood, understand? Lu Xiaoyi's eyes began to clear, and he finally stopped the killing intent in his heart. He looked at the people in front of him who did not dare to move without him saying a word. They were afraid that if they moved, they would be attacked by the flying swords. He knew that if he said some polite words now, he would be able to subdue some of them, but he still could not do this. Putting away Qi, he coldly said, "Winged people, gather the entire race and prepare to intercept the red flood. Your future status in the main world will be closely related to how much effort you put in this time. Otherwise, Zerg's red flood will be raised privately, and you will carry this blame until your race is annihilated. Plain people, I want all the human cultivators in the front star to support. We will intercept the rest of the people first, and see if we can control the situation to an acceptable level. After saying that, he did not explain. He leaped up and went straight to the space where the red flood was. At the same time, he contacted the heavenly eyes in his heart to ask for support. Grief could not be reminisced for the time being. The living had too many things to do. The biggest problem with Zerg's red flood was that once it spread, it could not be eradicated. As long as one escaped, as long as this one was lucky enough to encounter another Zerg swarm, then the evolved version of Zerg would completely spread in the universe. To prevent this kind of situation from happening, time was very important. The most important thing was to surround it as soon as possible. This was the fundamental reason why White Tiger stopped him from being impulsive. These for Taoists were not easy to deal with. If they really fought, the Red Flood would definitely go out of control. In theory, Lu Xiaoyi's mission this time would be a complete failure. He would also leave an impression in front of the heavenly Tao that he did not care about integrity and was impulsive and easily angered. This was not a good thing. If it was not because of this kind of coincidence, White Tiger would have been the first to kill. How could he still be patient? How could he still persuade Lu Xiaoyi? Everything seemed to have been arranged long ago. One loop after another. It was too much for the eyes to take in. He did not even have the time to reflect on his sadness. Cultivation was like this. People had no choice but to keep rushing forward. Stopping meant falling behind. It meant falling behind. Never stopping. Chapter 2273. Lu Xiaoyi's group of 10 didn't stop and flew towards Zerg's red zone. Among them were him, White Tiger, for Taoists, and 4 hidden wings. The human race went to recruit the winged race, while the plain man flew straight to the front star. They were going to recruit a large number of people. In the void of the universe, the most effective thing to deal with a swarm of insects was manpower. It was impossible to expect a few people to seal off a part of the universe. However, these people might not be able to cover all areas. Therefore, the decisive force would definitely come from the large number of half-immortals in the inner and outer scenic skies. This was the main force to completely eliminate Zerg's red zone. Dealing with insects was just that troublesome. Therefore, the best way was to do it while they were still in the dormant egg stage. Once they were activated, the trouble would be magnified countless times. Sambai looked at the swordsman beside him. Fortunately, he had finally returned to normal. However, he still wanted to get a guarantee. Enforcer, our purpose for coming here wasn't pure. Fortunately, we didn't do anything to harm Xian Yuan. In the end, whether it was against White Tiger or Immortal Rock in the lower realm, we were all in a wait-and-see mode. Enforcer, Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. He knew what this Taoist was thinking. He was afraid that he would seek revenge. After calming down, although he was still confused about the cause and effect of this matter, he roughly understood a lot of things. The most important thing was that the forces involved in this hunt, not to mention the forces of the origin world, were no longer important. Just speaking of the Black Hand from the Immortal Court, there was more than one group. Immortal Rock was one group, and there was another group that was secretly supporting it. There was another group that was lying in the space of wings, spreading skies, to absorb the life force for Zerg to control. There was another group that wanted to eliminate Zerg's red zone. Finally, Immortal Rock's immortal spirit went out of control. This was probably the 5th group. With so many forces of the Immortal Court mixed together, none of them were pure. If he still didn't let these lower realm cultivators go under such circumstances, he would only be doing what some people wanted. He had to focus on a main conflict, not the minor details. This was something he had to be clear about. Acting on impulse would cause very serious consequences. Moreover, he had time. Whoever did something would not be able to escape his wrath. Among these few Taoists, Quan Chung did not cause much harm. 2 of them were killed in the beginning, and the remaining 4 have been playing hide and seek with White Tiger. It was a fact that they did not have much karma in the matter of Chong Lu. Moreover, this Sambai was very unusual. He was even more mysterious than the so-called night watchman of the Kunlun visitor. He needed to see clearly. He had always had a good habit, and that was to try his best to avoid the main character's disease in biographies and novels. It was right for him to kill people, but it was unforgivable for others to kill him. This was a very dangerous way of thinking. It was the late stage of Chinibu, the root of all evil, the beginning of indulgence. Therefore, he had always accepted other people's hostility towards him. After all, when it came to killing people, Lu Xiaoyi, was the most evil one. Thinking about military monks, bamboo hats, and so on, he had never thought of going to kill them all. This idea was very naive. When a military monk's bamboo hat fell, thousands of such people would stand up. This was the truth of the cultivation world. Here, killing to stop killing was not suitable, at least in some aspects. What he had to do was to look at the overall situation at the top. This was also the wish of Li Wuya and Chong Lu, not simply to avenge them. Could be finished? Even if he killed all the immortal court, it would not be finished. There was a better way to pay tribute to Chong Lu. Today's matter. I have a habit of not looking for later accounts. But if there's a next time, then don't blame me for getting together. I won't ask who sent you here. There's no need for that. I'm afraid you don't know either. But what I want to say is, if you can't even judge your own actions and are controlled by others, where will your future path be? I am a member of the revolutionary force because I want to conform to the times. This is not an organization started by a certain person. Everyone who is in it is consciously voluntary. He was doing it for himself, not for anyone else. What about you? Who are you fighting for? For those who hide behind the scenes and want to be a tyrant forever? Everyone had their own thoughts. This was also the first time Lu Xiaoyi revealed his inclination in front of others. There was no need to hide it. The whole universe knew about it. Time was of the essence. In less than a quarter of an hour, they had arrived at the red zone. Because they had arrived in time, before the red zone had fully expanded, half of a huge mineral star had already melted and turned into their food. The rest of the mineral star had gradually transformed into countless larvae. They were born here as if the void was their home. They were growing at every moment, and their growth was astonishing. They were like a swarm of bees that had been magnified countless times, circling around the mineral star. It made people's scalps tingle. Spread out, control, don't kill. Lu Xiaoyi gave the order as if it was a matter of course, and no one felt that there was anything wrong with it. This was a terrible habit. When you got used to it, it was actually a new beginning. They were all peak half-immortals, so they naturally understood the meaning of Lu Xiaoyi's words. If they were to kill them now, it would be very easy for the red zone to spread out. The 10 half-immortals surrounded the mineral star from afar, but the overly large airspace caused their encirclement to be full of loopholes. They could only hope that the formation process of the red zone would be slower, enough for the human reinforcements to arrive. On the matter of killing the red zone, the 10 of them reached an agreement. If the winged swarm arrives, where should we arrange them? Shui Yu asked carefully. The winged people, were trembling with fear in this winged sky incident. It couldn't be said to be a success, because they didn't step forward at the most crucial moment, but it couldn't be said to be a failure because they didn't make a big mistake in the end. This was in private, but in public, Zerg's red zone was directly related to them. It was no longer convincing to say that they didn't know. The subspace was right next to the winged sky, and there was also the connection between the pearl and the immortal rock, the ancestor of the bloodline, involved. Who would believe that they didn't know? The only thing that could prove the winged people's innocence was that they had done their best to kill Zerg. If the red zone was successfully killed, the winged people would naturally wash away their sins. If it wasn't, then they wouldn't be able to explain themselves even if they jumped into the Milky Way. And all of this was decided by a single word from this sword cultivator. It was decided by whether the winged people were pleasing to the eye or not. She did not know how the winged ones had ended up in such a state. But now that the problem had been laid out, there was no turning back. Xuan Yuan's broken ship. You have to go even if you don't want to. Lu Xiaoyi glanced at her indifferently. Some of the insects have already mutated. Because we are afraid that they will explode, we can't make a move yet. We can only wait for the reinforcements to arrive. Because of the distance, you winged people will be the first to arrive. In other words, when the insect swarm migrates, you winged people may be the only organized force. So, are you ready to sacrifice yourselves? Chapter 2274. Shui Yu's heart was filled with bitterness. Were they ready to sacrifice themselves? Of course, they were ready, but they did not expect that their opponent would be Zerg. They had set humanity as their goal for nearly 1,000,000 years, but now they realized how wrong they were. Originally, they thought that because of the change of eras, the integration into the main world would be carried out in a relatively peaceful way. In the end, the heavenly axiom had already made arrangements. If they did not pay the price, they would not be able to reach the step they dreamed of. She originally wanted to ask, if the winged race really tried their best this time, would there be less threats from the human world in the future? But after thinking about it, she did not ask. It was too childish. There would always be threats. There was never true safety. Life was to welcome one challenge after another. Not to mention the winged race. Even the sword vein, who was a pure human, was always going around in circles of life and death. Who could guarantee them? They had to get through this first. We are already prepared. We will use practical actions to prove the winged race's innocence. Lu Xiaoyi slowed down. He had never thought of exterminating a race. The winged race was also human. This was his principle. Don't complain. If you keep complaining, you'll find that the world is getting darker and darker, and there are enemies everywhere. Everyone is hostile to you, and in the end, you will feel that you are not as good as the winged race. Why don't you treat yourself as a member of the human race from now on? Just like how the Vanguard Star stopped you. You're going to stop Zerg now? Take this challenge as your responsibility. You are fighting for the entire human race. Only when you treat yourself as a human will others accept you. There are many ways to acknowledge others. The most effective way is blood. Lu Xiaoyi looked at the strong auras appearing from the circling Zerg swarm and finally pointed them out. You will not always be the main force of the battle. The Vanguard Star cultivators will come. Most importantly, the half-immortals of the inner and outer scenic sky will also come. If they can see a winged race that sacrificed a lot to fight the Zerg, the survival of the winged race in the future will be much less troublesome. Everyone will say, winged race? Well, they're no different from humans. The eyes of Snowfeather and the other hidden wings lit up. The half-immortals of the inner and outer scenic sky almost represented the new trend of the future universe's cultivation world. Having their approval was equivalent to having the approval of the entire cultivation world. This was equivalent to having a firm foothold in the origin world. In that case, wouldn't it mean that the more people who died, the more recognition they would receive? Sun Bai sighed in his heart. This swordsman is really not the typical bad guy. But you have to admit that he is very bad for a reason. Zerg will be stopped by the winged ones. The human world would be spared from the insect disaster. Although the winged race would suffer losses, they would still survive. At the end of the day, if you want to get something, you have to pay a price. If it wasn't this method, then it was that method. There was no way to avoid it. Humans would accept a foreign race, but only if they weren't too strong. The winged men's current situation was that they were a little overweight, so they had to lose weight. Such words could not be said. It would damage the reputation of the human race that loved all races. But he had to do it, because only by doing it could he maintain the eternal status of human beings in the cultivation world of the universe. This person was really scary. What was scary was not his ability to beat immortals, but his wisdom and the temperament of an ambitious person. As everyone expected, because of the distance, the winged race that was closest to the origin world moved out. Hundreds of thousands of winged race almost filled half of the void. Obviously, the winged race had a deep understanding of their environment. Rather than fighting with the humans in the future, they might as well start a war with Zerg now. They were arranged to one side, far away. Due to the huge commotion, the swarm of insects had also become restless. Their arrival allowed the encirclement to take shape, and it was a good start to completing this large-scale mass extermination battle. The remaining 2 reinforcements still needed time. Planet Xianbei was not too far away, but Planet Xianbei was different from before. It wasn't in a state of battle readiness, so it would take some time for them to gather. There was no meaning for them to come here scattered. To these human cultivators who were mainly Yuaniing true monarchs, heavy formations and strict battle formations were their forte. The half-immortals of the inner and outer scenic sky also needed time. Through the heavenly eyes, news could be instantly transmitted to the inner and outer scenic skies, but the projection of the half-immortals could not accurately reach the winged sky. They could only go to the surrounding airspace of planet Xianbei and then rush over. Time passed quickly. The humans hoped that Zerg would finish gathering as soon as possible, but as the strongest group of wanderers in the universe, Zerg's perception of danger was also very accurate. They had already realized the danger, so even though there was still a small number of insects left on the Ore star that had not been converted, those that had already been converted finally began to tentatively look for a way out. How to surround a swarm of tens of millions of Zergs? That was a very troublesome problem. If they maintained a strong pressure from all directions, the worst situation would occur. The swarm would no longer attack in an orderly manner, but would scatter and flee. Because if they couldn't seal all the space, there would definitely be fish that escaped the net. The best way was to maintain a pressure that made the swarm feel threatened in a few directions and flee in the direction with the least threat. This was the most common tactic in Mortal Wars. Encircling 3 and missing 1, they had to leave the direction with the least threat, so that the swarm would feel the hope of escaping as a group. Only then would they not scatter, but instead work hard in that direction in an organized manner. The task of driving away the insects naturally had to be done by the half-immortals, because their high cultivation realm could make the swarm instinctively feel danger. And the weak direction could only be played by the winged people, because most of them were sky wings, and their strength was limited compared to the swarm. This simple strategy was also the essence of a human war art. Before the swarm had a sufficiently intelligent insect queen, this strategy was effective. The winged people immediately felt a strong pressure. Even if they were obviously stronger, after killing a few dozen insects, they would still be bitten into pieces by the swarm of insects. The most worrying thing was that the hidden wings of the winged people couldn't casually make a move. They couldn't let the swarm feel that there were still half-immortals in this direction. If they felt it, the swarm would change direction, and in other directions, the limited number of half-immortals was not enough to completely cover them. The battle unfolded just as Lu Xiaoyi had imagined. He had already experienced this once, and that was in Melon's star. The swarm of insects rushed over like waves, and they were badly battered in front of the rocks that were not solid. The winged people also fell down in groups, but none of them retreated. This was for their race, for the future generations. Shuiyu looked at the tragic scene in front of her, which was beyond her imagination, and her heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. But she couldn't join in to protect her own race. She looked at Lu Xiaoyi. Must it be like this? Lu Xiaoyi was as cold as stone. I know you hate, but you must be clear about who you hate. We are all chess pieces that can't control ourselves. The ones who are really controlling everything are those high above, the ones who place the subspace beside the winged sky. Chapter 2275. The battle continued with the deaths of the winged ones. It was a challenge to their nerves. If it wasn't for their conviction, no one would be able to endure such torture. However, the human demigods who were chasing after the winged ones did not hesitate at all. This was because they had seen too many similar sacrifices in the universe's cultivation world. As time passed, history would eventually prove that such sacrifices were purposeful and organized massacres. If it was because of a certain person, the root cause could still be found. However, the truth was that in most such tragedies, the culprit could not be found at all. This was because the root cause was a habit and philosophy that spread throughout the universe. If one had to find a culprit, every human would be the culprit. The demigods did not completely sit back and do nothing. While they were chasing away the winged ones, they also killed the most dangerous existences in the swarm before Zerg reacted. This was the most dangerous stage. The demigods did not dare to use their full strength for fear of causing the swarm to explode. They could only temporarily let the winged ones bear the initial pressure, causing huge damage. Everything was reasonable, but everything was incomparably cruel. However, if this battle was understood as the price for a race that had been at odds with humans for hundreds of thousands of years to finally integrate into the human world, it was the best excuse for both the winged ones and humans. Humans would be proud of their nobility, and the winged ones would also be able to find an excuse to whitewash their history. They would also naturally become closer to the humans. The truth might be cruel, but as time passed and the people involved slowly died, the truth would disappear. The history left behind would be an acceptable explanation for both sides to coexist. At this time, cruelty would become a great sacrifice. Everyone loved to hear this kind of story. However, this was the real process, and you had to endure it first. The winged ones were approaching the limit of their tolerance during this process. In fact, even Snowplume and the other hidden wings did not know where their limit was. At first, they thought that under the premise of a new era, losing more than 20% of their race was unacceptable. However, when they knew that they would be fighting Zerg, they subconsciously adjusted the limit to 30%. Now that the battle had really started, the 30% limit was quickly broken. They had no choice but to set the limit at not losing more than half of their race. This continued to challenge the limit and the nerves of the winged ones. When nearly half of the hundreds of thousands of winged ones were killed under the attack of tens of millions of winged ones, and when the hidden wings could not hold on any longer, the humans gave them another shot of confidence. The vegetarians had arrived with the Vanguard Human Legion. Tens of thousands of well-trained human cultivators formed a tight formation, and some of them replaced the winged ones' defensive line. Although they were fewer in number, the weakest among them was Yuanying. Their addition instantly stabilized the entire defensive line. This gave the winged ones a false signal that they would win if they continued to persevere. Perhaps this was true on the battlefield, but for the winged race, they had unknowingly broken the bottom line of their losses. Lu Xiaoyi wasn't paying attention to the battle in front of him. That's because the inner and outer scenery sky half-immortals were arriving one after another. From 1 to 2, they gradually formed into groups of 3 to 5. What they came here to do was not to immediately enter the battle, but to quickly fill in the gaps in the encirclement. To humans, there was only one ultimate goal. Not even a single bug was spared. To the winged race, this was a great cruelty, but to the entire Origin world, this was a great merit. The crux of the matter was how a race could avoid such a cruel exchange, and how they could prevent such a cruel exchange from happening to them. The winged race's integration into the Origin world had just begun, and they still had many things to learn. Amidst the intense impact, subtle changes were taking place in every aspect. Humans also began to suffer losses. But to the heroic cultivators of the front, this was nothing compared to what their seniors had experienced. They could completely withstand it. The winged race continued to suffer losses. It had already exceeded 50%. But now, they had no choice but to persevere because the humans beside them were also suffering losses. The inner and outer scenery sky, half-immortals, began to appear in groups. The huge encirclement had already taken shape, and the only difference was that the thickness of the encirclement was still lacking. The bugs were aware of the danger. They discovered that no matter what, they couldn't break through the formation in front of them. This made them realize that they might have fallen into some kind of trap. In the final frenzy, there were already small groups of bugs that began to look for a way out in other directions. When Snowy Feather looked at Lu Xiaoyi with teary eyes full of expectation, he finally nodded slightly and chopped down Snowy Feather's hand. Thousands of half-immortals attacked at the same time. The hidden wings also hastily rushed into their own group of winged humans. This damned Lu Xiaoyi. Once the half-immortals showed their strength, the swarm of insects would naturally return to their old path of attacking the winged humans and the frontline cultivators. It was another huge wave of damage. But this time, they had really wronged Lu Xiaoyi. He had also placed inner and outer scenery sky half-immortals among the winged race, so he couldn't let these people suffer too much losses. If he didn't care, the entire winged race might be taken away by the huge bug swarm. He needed to know his limits and stop before going too far. But he himself didn't throw himself into killing Zerg from the beginning to the end. Instead, he watched from afar, always ready to intercept small groups of bugs that occasionally slipped through. White Tiger was also by his side, and he was very curious. "I thought that you would take this opportunity to go on a killing spree and vent your anger." Lu Xiaoyi sneered. "How childish would I be to vent my anger towards some superiors on bugs? These two were not equivalent at all, right? Old White, don't worry. These things that have happened won't change my established strategy. It will only make me more determined to continue walking. There will be more such changes in the future. Senior Brother Chong Lu is not the first, and also won't be the last." "I understand." Of course he understood. In fact, after killing Immortal Pong, he immediately understood that the reason why he showed signs of going on a rampage was only intentional. It was all for the sake of using this unreasonable state to intimidate some people. He, who had been on the streets, understood the nature of humans very well. When you were fighting for territory in the marketplace, with your body covered in blood and your eyes blood red, you would be shocked by the strength of those masters. They would generally become obedient at this time, and would be more willing to cooperate instead of stroking the tiger's whiskers. He also wouldn't believe that these people were sincerely obedient to him. But because the timing of Zerg's red flash was too coincidental, everyone needed a way out. Of course, he would settle the score, but he needed a more suitable reason. He wasn't that forgetful. Every participant who attacked the people around him would be punished. This was human nature, because those who were lucky enough to escape at that time, out of fear of him, Lu Xiaoyi would never think that the two sides had reached a true reconciliation. In order to eliminate this thorn, they would still continue to fight against each other. It was just that it would be more covert. They were all in the half-immortal realm. Who could deceive who? Chapter 2276. Finally, it was coming to an end. The insect swarm was decreasing, and the number of half-immortals was increasing. There were thousands of them, so many that they didn't need the winged ones or the Vanguard Star's power. They didn't even need to surround them and could break through. Only at this moment could Lu Xiaoyi truly breathe a sigh of relief. This time, Zerg's red flood was under control. Perhaps in the future, there would be a red flood in other places, and there was a high possibility that it would go out of control, but that wasn't his problem. He could do his own thing well, but he couldn't take care of the universe's affairs. This was the problem of the entire universe's cultivation world. Snowy Feather and Serene came in front of him with complicated expressions. The sudden change was almost unbearable for her, but she still forced herself to remain calm, unwilling to reveal her weakness. Enforcer, the winged ones didn't disappoint you. In this battle, more than 60% of the winged ones died, and the rest were all injured. Many of them damaged their foundations. Lu Xiaoyi looked at her quietly. "You find it hard to accept? You feel that humans are too cruel?" Snowy Feather didn't answer, but it was this silence that represented her true thoughts. Lu Xiaoyi pointed at the Vanguard Star and said indifferently, "If it wasn't for you, then it would be them. Do you think they will complain? Maybe, but they definitely won't think that this is a punishment from other humans. The principle of proximity is that wherever it happens, that place has to take responsibility. There's nothing to say. Just like how the Vanguard Star resisted the winged ones alone for hundreds of thousands of years. Some people left, but more people came. This is responsibility. The difference between humans and other races is that even if they still complain, when they take responsibility, they will never shrink back. Serene felt that what he said was very good. Their fragrant clothes sect was the group that came from afar and took the initiative to stand in the front line against the winged ones. She also complained that she couldn't get more support from the universe's cultivation world, and complained that the higher-ups didn't eradicate this hidden danger. But no matter how much she complained, she never had the thought of leaving. But Snowy Feather's thoughts were different from hers. She didn't come here to listen to others preach about the greatness of humans. But fortunately, Lu Xiaoyi was a person who knew how to manipulate people's hearts. The winged ones had been eliminated. The big stick had been used, and now it was time to give them some carrot. After this battle, should we grieve for the departed spirits? Or celebrating a hard-won victory? Every species has their own way of doing things. Some hold memorial services, some hold celebrations. We humans have the habit of cheering for hard-won victories. I heard that the winged race has a very special ceremony. Was it for the Wind Dance Assembly? Is it only held on the most sacred occasions? I think now is the right time. Anger rose in Shui Yu's heart. That's right, the Wind Dance Grand Assembly was the Winged Clan's grandest ceremony. But in this situation, with the loss of more than half of their clan, how could they have the mood to hold such a grand assembly? Wasn't this too much of an imposition? Lu Xiaoyi said indifferently. If the winged race holds such a grand event, I can guarantee that the majority of the half-immortals here, more than 5,000 inner and outer scenic sky elites, will participate. Snowfeather was startled, but immediately understood what this meant. 5,000 inner and outer scenic sky half-immortals, in addition to their teachers and friends, that was almost half of the entire universe's cultivation world. Holding a celebration on such an occasion meant that they had obtained the approval of these half-immortal elites. It also meant that they represented the approval of countless human orthodoxies in the origin world. It also meant that the winged race had finally taken their first step in the origin world. Wasn't this their wish that they had looked forward to for nearly 1,000,000 years? She bowed gracefully. Thank you, Inspector. If you have any orders in the future, I dare not follow you in life and death. Snowfeather went to make arrangements, leaving Su Rin looking at him with a complicated expression. She didn't dare to say anything, but when she thought of his wretchedness when he was disguised as a zombie, she seemed to have forgotten his savagery. Aunt Shui has been fooled by you again. If you have any orders, the winged race will go extinct. Lu Xiaoyi smiled slightly, and his expression became gentle. Sister Su Rin, what are you saying? Am I that kind of person? If everyone thinks like you, for the sake of the human race's welfare, how big of a scapegoat would I have to bear? Su Rin looked at him, thinking in her heart, what was the reason for a cultivator's personality to be so different from his external appearance? So different that it was as if they were two different people? A wretched and evil ordinary person, and a savage and tyrannical person? Lu Xiaoyi knew what she was thinking, and said softly, I am me, and I have never changed. It's just that because of some unavoidable responsibilities, unavoidable changes, I have to adapt in order to survive. One day, I will return to my original self, because the days now are too tiring. Su Rin looked at him warily. Fortunately, you didn't say that it's because you have to bear the hope of the entire human race. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. The entire human race? It's none of my business. I only care about the people around me. The encirclement and suppression of Zerg's Red Flood was coming to an end. This was a perfect example of a successful operation that was surrounded by dangers at the beginning. It relied on the sincere cooperation of several forces, especially the selfless contribution of the winged race, and finally came to a successful end. Without a single exception, all the Zerg were killed on the spot. There were even demigods who purified the entire battle area, including the extra-dimensional space. Only by doing a clean job would they be able to obtain great merit. The broken limbs and broken bones in the air were mostly from the insects, but there were also some from the winged race and humans. They had won, but the atmosphere was not joyful. Under such pressure, the winged race began their once every 10,000 years dancing soul summoning. And at the same time, they also began a grand celebration. All the cultivators present were invited, and very few people refused. Except for a few who really had something to do, they also explained in detail the reason why they had to leave. Humans were a forgetful race, and this characteristic helped them to always be optimistic, but they would selectively forget heavy things. This was an instinct, and it was not deliberately targeted at anyone. Therefore, for the winged race, the most important problem was how to strike while the iron was hot. While everyone still remembered the contributions of the winged race, they had to strengthen this layer of relationship and obtain recognition, either openly or secretly. It was definitely impossible to leave some kind of contract, and there would not even be verbal promises. However, this battle would definitely spread throughout the universe through the mouths of the demigods, forming a trend of public opinion. Naturally, the winged race would also succeed in their first step of integrating into the main world. Don't believe in so-called contracts. The existence of contracts is actually to be broken. Even the contracts within a human race have a time limit, let alone other things. We have fought for the sword vein for tens of thousands of years, but we did not fight for a non-aggression contract in the sword vein. This is the truth of the main world. Lu Xiaoyi reminded. Chapter 2277. Have you made any preparations for where the winged men will be temporarily staying? Serene asked. Her feelings were very complicated. To the people of the Frontier Star, it was really magical for them to coexist peacefully with their opponents after fighting for nearly 1,000,000 years. But this was the cultivation world. Other forces could fight from the beginning of the world to the end of the era. It was natural for them to be separated for a long time and separate for a long time. At the very least, the people of the Frontier Star could completely let go of their burdens and welcome a new life, putting all their energy into the arrival of the new era. Their hatred would eventually dissipate. Shui nodded. We have already made preparations. The winged men who came out previously only had one mission, which was to find a suitable star region. It had to be far enough and remote enough, far away from the human cultivation world. Fortunately, we winged men do not have a strong need for spiritual opportunity. To us, having a sky that is enough for us to roam freely is enough. Wait a moment. We will announce it publicly at the Wind Dance Conference. Once the conference ends, we will set off. The distance is very far, and it will probably take a few hundred years of flight. Su-Ren was very sad. She would not be able to see this friend, this senior, for a very long time. Shuiyu patted her shoulder. Little Su, you should be happy for us. This is the wish of the winged men for nearly 1,000,000 years. It is our pride that we have achieved it today. This is a journey of hope. There is no need to be on guard, because we are also a member of this world. There may still be battles, but that will be because of other reasons, not because of race. Su-Ren nodded. It was really not easy for the winged men and for the humans of the Frontier Star. Shuiyu looked at Lu Xiaoyi. Enforcer, when the winged men settle down, can you invite Enforcer to be a guest? Lu Xiaoyi rubbed his nose. Of course, if I'm not killed by someone at that time. But you winged men have to be careful. I usually bring disaster wherever I go. If you're not afraid, then of course I don't care. Shuiyu looked at him meaningfully. The winged men have already been branded with the Enforcer's brand and can no longer be removed. What disaster is there to talk about? Watching Snowy Feather leave, Lu Xiaoyi shrugged and said to Su-Yu, what does this have to do with me? Su-Ren also turned around and left. The Enforcer came here and wailed. Do you think the other forces in the cultivation world will still accept us? Looking at the backs of the two people, Lu Xiaoyi shook his head and smiled bitterly. He really did not have the intention to subdue any forces here. The Frontier Star was too weak, and the winged men were too troublesome. However, there were some things that he could not decide. In the future, there would still be such unwilling followers. This was actually a kind of coercion. Intentionally or unintentionally, a group of core members brought along the majority of those who were nervous. This was the true face of the Great Change. Being firm was not everyone's choice. However, if one wanted to obtain more in the future, one had to become firm, regardless of whether it was passive or active. He could not help with this. After all, from the looks of it now, their so-called emerging force was still a little weak. They were walking on thin ice. The Wind Dance Conference was held very smoothly. The winged men were still quite sensible in this aspect. They did not raise any requests and only displayed their history. The vulgar things of the winged men left a good impression on others. Most importantly, the survival philosophy, similar to humans, the standards of good and evil, and the moral standards were the basis for humans to finally accept them. This battle gave them a good start. However, there were too many factors to consider as to where they would go next. No one could be sure. However, in Lu Xiaoyi's opinion, if there were no big mistakes, there would not be any big twists and turns before the change of the era. As for after the change of the era, everyone was like a clay bodhisattva crossing the river. No one had a sense of superiority over the other. This kind of conference was destined to not last for too long. You could not really expect these high and mighty half-immortals to completely get along with the winged men. The half-immortals were only willing to give them face because of the winged men's contributions in this war. Stopping before going too far was the only way to maintain this kind of good impression. 2 hours later, the half-immortals began to leave one after another. An unfamiliar acquaintance came to his side. Enforcer Xing has done such a big thing, destroying the winged men, killing the half-immortals, killing the immortal rock. Just these few things, Enforcer Xing's prestige is flourishing. This poor Taoist would like to congratulate Enforcer Xing. From today onwards, in the cultivation world of the universe, no one will dare to look down on your power. The person who came over was Sinbai, a very interesting fellow. Lu Xiaoyi looked at him meaningfully. Taoist Sin, you haven't left yet? From what I see, your companions seem to be in a hurry to leave. At that time, there were only 4 Taoists left in rock journeys of 10,000 miles. Other than Sinbai, there was also Kunlun Guest, Taoist Huahai, and Old Woman Foam. These 3 people had already quietly left when the insect extermination was set. They did not even participate in the winged men's wind dance conference. However, Lu Xiaoyi's eyes were very sharp. He could still see everything clearly among the thousands of half-immortals. Was it because he had a guilty conscience? He would find out eventually. Sinbai sneered. My heart is selfless. Why would I leave? It's just that winged men encountered too many regrets. Taoist Chong Lu's change is really a pity. I don't hide things from my heart. Some connections should be made clear. Otherwise, Enforcer Xing's flying sword might descend from the sky. Wouldn't that be an injustice? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Since Taoists dared to come, then the flying sword might not necessarily descend. My senior brother's matter has nothing to do with others. It's inevitable that a jar will break by the well. It's inevitable that a swordsman will die in battle. This is how the world is. Taoist does not need to care about it. But from what I see, Taoist seems to have come because of the insect infestation. Sinbai nodded. It was easy to talk to smart people. Their eyes could see things clearly, and they could distinguish things clearly. There was no need to explain too much. Exactly. In fact, all of us have complicated backgrounds. Each of us has our own thoughts. Otherwise, we wouldn't have ended up like this in a battle with such a great disparity in strength. Besides Enforcer Xing, you and I can't see through him. In fact, those 2 senior brothers of yours are dangerous. But there is one thing you can rest assured about. It will be difficult for such a battle formation to appear again. Before the era changes, everyone only cares about their own business. There aren't many people who are truly willing to die for the higher-ups, so why bother? 3 of the night watchmen came, not because of their strength, but because the 3 of them are relatively obedient. The rest are playing dead. That's the way smart people do things. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. This was within his expectations. When the great edifice was about to collapse, those with brains would inevitably have their own thoughts. Perhaps they would change their minds, or perhaps they would place their bets on both sides. How much loyalty and righteousness would there be? Moreover, The change of the era was so clear. Everyone knew that change was the trend. It was just that few people jumped out to take up the banner because of their old feelings. This was also the reason why the 4 monks were easily killed by him in the Tau realm space, who asked the higher-ups to send 4 blockheads down. They clung to the original Great Tao and were asking for humiliation. Chapter 2278. Senbai sighed. I came to Wings, spreading heavens, just to make up the numbers. There aren't enough qualified fighters, so they thought of me, the person who was exiled by the immortal court. But I shouldn't be a chess piece of some big shot. Whether I come or not, it's up to my heart. No one can control me. After all, I still have some old connections up there. But I still came, not because of the Xianyuan sword vein, but because of Zerg's red glow. I have my own information channel, but it's not very clear, but it all points to Wings, spreading heavens. The red glow requires the life energy of a half-immortal. Whether it's us or you, it's the same. So to me, it doesn't matter who dies, I just want to find the location of Zerg's red glow. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head as he listened. This Senbai was someone who didn't care about the heavenly eyes. He was used to doing things his own way and didn't want to seek help from others, preferring to explore alone, which was indeed in line with his previous identity. After all, he was gilded in the immortal court, and his mentality was different from the lower realm cultivators. He didn't care about this person who didn't care about the lives of the sword vein, and he didn't need others to care about him. It seems like you've achieved your goal. Senbai smiled. Yes, but the process was completely out of my expectations. I have to say, you swordsman's strength is far beyond my understanding. It seems that the immortal court's fear of you is not without reason. If it wasn't for the coincidence of my trip, I'm afraid I would have met with a disaster. Lu Xiaoyi was very modest. It's not a coincidence. It's the will of the heavens. The will of the heavens is changeable, so it will definitely let us win. Although you have a setback, you haven't lost the favor of the heavens, which is also a good thing. Senbai smiled, but didn't comment. I see that you seem to be very interested in the matters up there. Lu Xiaoyi nodded, then shook his head. Everyone is interested, but I don't think I have the right to know, and it's not necessarily a good thing. If there are too many fetters, the sword won't be fast. Moreover, if I should know, I will eventually know. Senbai was very impressed. Goodwill. It's not without reason that you can come to this step. I was banished to the lower realm, and everyone who knew about my origin wanted to know some secrets from me, but they never thought that the upper realm is about to close. What's the point of you knowing these trivial matters? Furthermore, the reason why I was able to survive being demoted was because keeping my mouth shut. What else could I say? If I say it out loud, it will only mess up my mind. I might as well not say it. Bye. Senbai is this person who was banished from the immortal court. Senbai's S, he's is his, S is S knots. The wings is his eyes, S2's heavens is his. TTS. You may have guessed it. The masters of the immortal court are all making arrangements for their funerals. However, cats have their own ways, and dogs have their own ways. As for me, my method is rather special. I deliberately look for an opportunity to be banished to the mortal world. Others did it secretly, but I did it openly. What do you think of mine? Lu Xiaoyi was a little surprised. Can't the immortal court use this? Not bad. Open and above board, brazen and bold. But I'm curious. Don't others know about fellow Taoists? Senbai laughed. They found out too late. This loophole can only be exploited by those with foresight. By the time others think of it, will have been blocked. How can't you just degrade yourself? Moreover, it's hard to grasp. You need to make the right mistake. If you don't make it, you'll be killed directly. If you don't make it, you won't achieve your goal. Most importantly, you have to have someone above you. I've met all these requirements, so I'm the only one who's debasing myself to find an opportunity in the lower realm. He was funny, and Lu Xiaoyi listened with ease. However, he also knew that's hard to grasp. Someone above? This made him very curious. Who could have influenced an immortal's demotion? Senpai seemed to know what he was thinking. This person was interesting. Others didn't ask, but he said it himself. It was as if he didn't have the shrewdness of a high-level cultivator. You can't ask who's above me. I won't answer either, but I'm a human immortal. If I'm a true immortal, I'm afraid I won't be demoted. Lu Xiaoyi was a little speechless. He didn't ask either. Therefore, he probed, well, if an immortal is demoted, can he still go back to the cram school? Senpai laughed. Of course not. But that's within the era. If it's outside the era, who knows? How can such things be certain? Don't those immortals' arrangements also depend on luck? Everyone depends on luck. It's just that I depend on luck differently from them. Lu Xiaoyi was a little impressed. If what this guy said was true, his courage was extraordinary. But if he really got over it, and everyone had to go through the same thing when the era changed, it might not be a bad idea. Senpai joked for a while more before his face turned serious. If I talk to myself like this, you must think I'm an old man without any shrewdness. But that's my character. I don't like to beat around the bush. To be honest, we don't have much time left. We don't have time to play with those hypocrites. I think highly of you. I've only heard about it before, but I believe that seeing is believing. We don't have any friendship, and it's a little late to cultivate now. And with our status, we might not be able to lower ourselves to accommodate each other. So I'll be honest, Senpai said seriously. With your strength, you can help me. Of course, I won't use you for free. In the future, I'll prove that I can help you even more. Everyone has their difficulties. You don't have any now, but it doesn't mean you won't have any in the future. After I prove my worth, I hope you can exchange with me of equal value. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. It was indeed like this, a world of exchange of benefits. But he didn't dislike it. This kind of person was much better than those who threatened him with principles. But if he wanted to exchange value with Lu Xiaoyi, he couldn't do it without something real. You might not know that my needs might be very high. Senpai smiled. Of course I know. Looking at your actions, I know what you want to do. Do you really think everyone is blind? I'll still say the same thing. What I can help you with is much more than what you think, and much more important. Let's wait and see, and then talk about the exchange. After Senpai finished speaking, he floated away. He didn't talk about how to contact him in the future. It seemed that, to him, this was not a problem. That's right. A cultivator who was once an immortal must have his own unique vision and methods. Things that are not known to the cultivators of the main world are difficult for you, but they are easy for him. Lu Xiaoyi sneered. Then let's wait and see. Chapter 2279. Senpai had left, but there were still people waiting for him. The bamboo hat flew over lightly. This went against his wishes, but there were some things that had to be said clearly. He came down with the half-immortals of Interior Realm. After the battle, he heard about everything that had happened in Winged Sky, which made him a little restless. He originally thought that Lu Xiaoyi should be very clear about the twists and turns of Heaven's Eye's arrangement this time. But this matter was too big. He was worried that swordsmen would really go crazy. A person who could kill the immortal rock, and his sex senior died in this conspiracy. Would he want to take revenge? It was not considered an attack, but an open challenge. Should he accept or not? If he accepted, he would be courting death. If he did not, it would be a disgrace. Therefore, although he resisted in his heart, he still had to explain. I'm very sorry about what happened to Renovated Tower Senior. He is also my most respected senior in Interior Realm. It has nothing to do with orthodoxy. Our positions are different. This is a battle of Tao. There's nothing to say. However, this arrangement has nothing to do with me. This time, I've already been taken over by Heaven's Eye. This is not an excuse, it's the truth. Perhaps, one day, we will still have to fight, but I hope that the reason for the fight is a battle of Tao, not a conspiracy. Lu Xiaoyi looked at him amusedly. He knew that this guy was afraid. It has nothing to do with you. I'm not crazy to the point where I can't tell right from wrong. But what I want to know is, have my friends returned? Or is there a similar trap waiting for them? This is a bad start. If everyone uses despicable methods, if others can do it, we could do it too. The bamboo hat nodded. I understand what you mean. In fact, that's what I mean too. But I can't control those old guys. Some of them are stubborn. Your friends shouldn't be a problem, at least as far as I know. Those people who appear in winged sky are not easy to find. It's unrealistic to attack them all at once. Their plan should have started with you. If they succeed, there will be a follow-up. If they fail, then there will be no future. The bamboo hat tried his best to persuade. Although he knew that his advice might not be useful, he still had to do his best. If this fire started, he might also get burned. Lu Xiaoyi seemed to have listened, but it also seemed like he did not. This made him feel that his advice had failed. He shouldn't have come here. He had lost his confidence for no reason. Why bother coming here? There shouldn't be any follow-up, right? At the very least, there were still 4 Taoists who survived from the wings spreading heaven's hunt. If they were all fine, then what about the others? It wasn't hard to guess that the route was at the top. The wind dance assembly finally came to an end. The winged ones kept their word and immediately began their long journey. For a race like theirs, moving was extremely easy because they had no home to move to. No house, no land, and no property. It was cleaner than the sword vein. In fact, this was a common characteristic of all demon beasts, especially those with wings. The migration of 200,000 to 300,000 people was a magnificent sight. It was a bit like the wind was blowing and the water was cold. In sorrow, they fly to hope. In hope, they remember the sorrow, and hope that along the way they can heal something. Snowy Feather and the rest of the hidden wings did not come over to say goodbye. They had already said what they needed to say, and there were some things that they could not say now. They still needed a long time to adjust their mentality. Next was the human army of the front star. They were much happier because the losses were within an acceptable range. Surin also did not come over to say goodbye, because she did not know how to say goodbye. Did she need to say goodbye? It was hard to say how this incident would ferment in the future. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen. Provoking such a person, she really did not know if it was a good thing or a bad thing. She did not deny that Lu Xiaoyi might have an incomparably bright future. But the key question was, could you live to see his success? Before success, there was bound to be countless bones paving the way. Who could guarantee that they would not be one of those paving bones? It was easy to say to move with the flow, but not everyone had such confidence. Those who should leave had all left. The white tiger turned back. We should also go back. Lu Xiaoyi's eyes were filled with confusion. Should we go? Should go. There's no benefit in staying, and it'll only add to the sadness. The white tiger was quite gratified, because it no longer had to care about Xuanyuan's life and death. It could leave everything to the young man in front of it. If it was tens of thousands of years ago, it would not think this way. It would think that this young man was not brave and lacked the vengeful spirit of a swordsman. He was fearless. He did not follow the oldest tradition of Xuanyuan sword vein, and so on. However, after tens of thousands of years of cultivation, it really calmed down its heart and understood the value of giving in. This was also its biggest gain in tens of thousands of years. From being incomparably sharp to being both soft and hard, this was a huge improvement. At the very least, it used its last bit of forbearance to buy precious time for everyone during the rock journey of 10,000 miles. If it was tens of thousands of years ago, it would have already started to risk its life. It was because of this understanding that it was satisfied with Lu Xiaoyi's calm performance. It was not only him, but also Tsinbai and the other Taoists, Bamboo Hat, Shuiyu, Su Ren, and so on. The calmness after the madness made people feel more at ease. It was also because of this calmness that they could finally complete the extermination of the insect swarm. That was what White Tiger believed. When a cultivator knew when to compromise, that cultivator would have completely matured and not always immersed in the self-blame of losing his elders, even if it had nothing to do with him. Tell me about senior brother Chonglu. When we return to the interior, Old White, you will definitely hide in your broken place to sleep. I'm afraid that a lot of memories will be lost because of your sleep. The white tiger glared and immediately exhaled. It didn't matter if he waited. Now that a large number of half-immortals were returning, it was also very crowded. What's there to say about him? In these tens of thousands of years, I have seen too many such departures. After seeing this kind of thing so many times, it doesn't matter, including others, including myself. Chong Lu's result was not bad. In the end, he was able to kill an immortal beast. Most people were not as good as him, for example. Forget it. What's the point of talking about this? The more I talk about it, the more chaotic my heart is. Lu Xiaoyi did not ask. He knew who the white tiger was referring to. 3 Qin, Wu Shixing, and so on. In the end, the peerless geniuses of that generation did not escape the ruthlessness of time. Did the white tiger escape? Not really. It was just left behind at a certain point in time. Its glory had long passed. In the future, it could only watch helplessly. This kind of life was not something that a human swordsman could endure. They would rather be like Chong Lu. Senior brother Chong Lu, is it really like what he said, there is no hope? Even if it's just a glimpse of the new era, what will it be like? To see the future Xuanyuan's position in the new world? This is what he is most concerned about, right? Chapter 2280. White Tiger Side. It's more serious than you think. You're still young, and you've never worried about your lifespan. You don't know that there are so many things you haven't done before the end of your life. You're worried about your old friends. It's a feeling of powerlessness that makes people despair. That's why Chong Lu tried his best to prolong his lifespan. He even considered transforming into a soul sword. Soul sword was a forbidden technique in Xianyuan sword sect. It was to refine the soul of the sword with one's body. In the end, it became a powerful sword with only faith but no intelligence. The only advantage was that it could last for a long time, even up to 10,000 years. Xianyuan didn't like this. The living were guarded by the dead, which meant that they deserved to die. But in Chong Lu's case, it was a way, a helpless way. There was no other way. In the past 10,000 years, there were too few outstanding swordsmen who had the ability to guard Xianyuan. From the old white tiger's words, Lu Xiaoyi could deeply understand the difficulties of those extraordinary years. When they were young eagles growing up without worries, the sky above their heads had always been supported by their seniors, generation after generation. Once the soul sword was formed, it was a complete half-death. There was no turning back. He tried to relax the atmosphere. Was it because he saw me that he finally gave up the idea of becoming a soul sword? White Tiger couldn't help but laugh. Your face is really big. What are you thinking? When Chong Lu had this idea, it was 5,000 years ago. At that time, you were still a space spore. The one who stopped him was none other than his senior brother, Wu Shixing. Lu Xiaoyi listened quietly. Amidst the secrets of these seniors, those glorious years, those selfless contributions, and the truth buried in the dust of history, they seemed to be able to give him endless power in his heart, the power of inheritance. The old white tiger opened his mouth. When talking about himself, he was always cautious, but when talking about these heroes of his sect, he was full of pride. This is a process. From the beginning of Li Wuya's kidnapping of Tao De to the lower realm until now, there are actually several stages. The first 5,000 years were led by the 3 Qins and supplemented by Wu Shixing and Chong Lu. That was also the 5,000 years when Xianyuan was under the greatest pressure. Li Wuya's influence made it difficult for Xianyuan to move forward in the cultivation world of the universe. Li Wuya was criticized, attacked, insulted, and even fought with his bare hands. Originally, San Qin could have lived for another few thousand years, but the enormous pressure quickly exhausted his life energy. 5,000 years later, the sword was broken, and then the era of Wu Shixing Chong Lu began, with Hu Xiudao's help. After another 5,000 years, Hu Xiudao passed away in an accident. Only Wu Shixing and Chong Lu were left. Fortunately, the pressure at this time was not as heavy as it was at the beginning. The forgetful nature of human beings made most people stop staring at the sword vein. Xianyuan could finally breathe a sigh of relief. In these 10,000 years, Xianyuan should be grateful for the support of the 5th ring. Even in the most difficult times, at the very least, the fifth ring didn't betray Xian Yuan. When Li Wuya was still alive, they promised that the fifth ring would be won forever, and they did it. History slowly unfolded in front of Lu Xiaoyi. It was cruel, but it made people's blood boil. The old white tiger didn't mention himself from the beginning to the end, but Lu Xiaoyi knew that since it was so clear about all this, it must have been fighting side by side. It was just that the old white tiger was a little pretentious. It was old, so it was understandable. Wu Shixing left 5,000 years ago. Like Chong Lu, he finished his life in battle. Before he left, he only left a sentence for Chong Lu. I am your senior brother, and always will be. In our generation, Li Wuya didn't choose to become an undead creature. San Qin didn't either. Hu Xuedao was the same. I, Wu Shixing, wouldn't do that. This is Xuan Yuan's legacy. I will never use the dead to protect the living. This is not the spirit of sword. The old white tiger sighed deeply. You see, I sent them away one by one like this. Under the long lifespan of a strange beast, the heart is incomparably tormented. I don't want to get to know new people because I know that after getting to know them, I'll have to send them off. I don't want to experience that feeling over and over again. As a result, I became more and more eccentric and became an unreasonable old man in your eyes. The former sixth ancestor. Lu Xiaoyi was silent. Only now did he know what Xian Yuan went through after Li Wuya. It was the persistence and dedication of generations of swordsmen. If it was Xi Zhao, he would have already been reduced to ashes. But the difference between Xian Yuan and Xi Zhao was that after the brightest star, there were more people who were silently working. So now, how many of these rising stars were there in the dome of the five rings? Lu Xiaoyi suddenly had a strong desire. He wanted to go back to the dome of the Shui Mountain and be a guide. The white tiger continued to nag. 5,000 years ago, after Wu Shixing left, Chong Lu was the only one left in Xian Yuan. He had to finish the last 5,000 years until he met a trustworthy successor. So he merged the past and the future, completely cutting off his slim chance of becoming an immortal. You have to know, the so-called cultivation is nothing more than cultivating a long life. This is the essence of cultivation. You suddenly gained a few thousand years of lifespan, so it is reasonable for the heavenly Tao to cut off your future. So when Chong Lu said that he had reached the end of his path, it was not empty words to comfort you, but the truth. Lu Xiaoyi was no longer an ignorant person. He had a deep understanding of these cultivation theories. He sighed. Senior brother, merging the past and the future to extend your lifespan is just an excuse. As for how much you can extend your lifespan, the heavenly Tao depends on your potential. If you are destined to have no hope of becoming an immortal, then your lifespan extension is limited, not more than 1,000 years. But senior brother persisted for 5,000 years after extending his lifespan, which can only mean one thing. Senior brother Chong Lu actually has the potential to become an immortal. It should not be small. He did not choose to become an immortal 5,000 years ago, but chose to extend his lifespan and continue to stay in the main world. The two of them stopped talking. Of course, they knew the reason for Chong Lu's choice. If he chose to become an immortal, then he would not be able to go down to the mortal world. He would not be able to provide the most direct help to Xian Yuan, and now there was no one who could really replace him. So, he resolutely gave up. What he chose to sacrifice was not as simple as his life. After a long time, the white tiger sighed and said, "These people should be erected for them." Lu Xiaoyi smiled brightly. "Definitely, but you have missed the most important one here. It is you. After Xian Yuan the Great Emperor, you have already protected Xian Yuan once, and after Li Wuya, you protected him again, but you never left your name. I will give you a big monument, pure white frost jade." The white tiger said angrily, "Stop, you are cursing me to death." Chapter 2281. White Tiger's eyes shone brightly. "Now we're handing this stick to you. You have to be clear about the responsibility on your shoulders. You can't talk about life and death so easily. At the very least, you have to find someone who can replace you. In my opinion, Xin Yuan won't be able to produce any talents in the next few thousand years. Just you and that Bullion. But Bullion can only be a general, not a commander. You have to know that. Lu Xiaoyi's eyes began to turn cold. I know. I'll definitely do my best this time. For everyone. Those heroic spirits who sacrificed everything for Xin Yuan. No power could remain unscathed after the passing of time, especially in an orthodoxy like Xin Yuan, especially when they had caused a huge disaster. It was these people who had supported the breathing sky from Mount E and the dome, allowing them to grow and grow. Lu Xiaoyi was one of the most typical examples. The white tiger was still nagging. When it was no longer cold and aloof, it was actually an old man who nagged endlessly about everything, no matter how big or small. It's good that you could endure this in wings, spreading heaven. Li Wuya couldn't. Later on, the three Qins, Wu Shixing, and Chong Lu couldn't bear it either. I think highly of you because you learned to endure. In this cultivation world, sometimes you really have to endure. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. Old White, you've really seen through me. I want to do big things, so I think more. I've become less swordsman. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. Old White Tiger nodded. It's a good thing. A good thing. With you here, I'm relieved. If I'm left alone, I don't know what to do. The biggest mistake in my life was to go to the wrong sect after leaving the mountain. As a result, I've been on tenterhooks for 100,000 years. Look at the other beasts. Which one of them isn't free and unfettered? They're indulging in the mountains and rivers, eating, drinking, and playing without any worries. I'm the only one who fell into this pit and can't climb out. The vast space began to become empty, without the red light of the insectoids, who would stay in such an inexplicable place for a long time. Old White Tiger suddenly remembered. That North Wind fellow. What did he secretly whisper to you about? You can't hide things from me. You have to learn to respect your elders. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. North Wind, what are you whispering about? You're thinking too much. I just want to know about the recent situation of my friends in the interior realm, Senior Marshal's sister, Qing Xian, Shi Shi, and the others. I can't just believe the words of that guy in the bamboo hat, can I? The old White Tiger nodded. That's true. They shouldn't be as risky as you are. Who asked you to be a tall tree that attracts the wind? However, Qing Xian and Shishi are both cunning and sly. Their Dharma meridians are rarely fooled like you. Bullion, on the other hand, you have to restrain her in the future. Don't be too reckless. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head and smiled bitterly. Old Bai, why don't you be the one to restrain Senior Sister? You're old and experienced. She won't dare to disobey you. I'm useless. She has to listen to whatever I say. After that, the man and the tiger identified the direction and began to move upward. That was the direction of the interior realm. Old White Tiger was not used to staying in the main world. The interior realm was its nest. If it did not stay there now, it might not survive when the new era came. Lu Xiaoyi also needed to go back and wait for news from his friends. The main target of the enemy force was him. Although it was said that who knew the real situation, the news in the interior realm was always more accurate and convenient for him to move. In the blink of an eye, he returned to the interior realm. Before leaving, Old White Tiger reminded him, so many things have happened. Don't stir up trouble for the time being. Think about the important matter of erecting a monument in the land of the Yellow Dragon. That's the key for you humans to settle down. You're a few years late. Don't you see that there are not many people in the interior realm now? This was the truth. Otherwise, under the command of the Eye of Heaven, there would be more than a few thousand people in the interior and exterior realm who killed insects. But who could say for sure? Was it for the survival of the human race? Or was it to concentrate on one's own path? Only God knew which was easier to succeed. Old White Tiger left. Lu Xiaoyi felt that it was unreal. When you were completely familiar with it, you would only have the mentality of an ordinary old man. It was lamentable. After respectfully sending the old man off, Lu Xiaoyi's face had the most common guilty smile of a disciple deceiving an elder. His mouth was a little wide, and his smile was a little stiff. White Tiger, who was not used to interacting with humans, did not seem to notice this. He did not move, not because he did not have a cave and had nowhere to go, but because a person sneakily jumped over from the clouds in the sky. It was North Wind, who was whispering in his ear in White Tiger's mouth. He came to Lu Xiaoyi's side and said softly, "Senior brother, I've figured out. Blood-dripping peak and ascending heaven peak were the command headquarters chosen by the Eye of Heaven this time. There were 7 or 8 old cultivators all year round. In fact, they were the brains of the hunt for Zerg's Red Flood this time. That bamboo hat was just a figurehead and was probably disheartened, so he was not often at ascending heaven peak. It's these old cultivators. All the arrangements were made by them." Lu Xiaoyi smiled slightly. "Okay, you step aside. I'll be right back." North Wind was a little dissatisfied. "Senior brother, I can also help from the side." Lu Xiaoyi smiled. "If you want to help, there will be plenty of opportunities in the future. This time won't make a difference. I was framed this time, so I have a reason to be unscrupulous for once. What excuse do you have? You have to understand that other than these trivial matters, I need eyes and ears in interior heaven." North Wind reluctantly retreated, but he did not go far. He knew that his senior brother was right. As the saying goes, every wrong has its perpetrator, and every debt has its debtor. He was not the party involved, so he could not be too presumptuous, but he could stay far away in case something went wrong. He knew that senior brother Lu had been attacked when he came down to help exterminate the insects. Being quick-witted, he immediately realized something. He stopped killing the insects and immediately came to receive orders. The insects here had not been exterminated, so he had returned to interior heaven at the first instant, for no other reason than to investigate the actual situation at blood-dripping peaks, ascending heaven peak. Actually, he already had a rough idea of this place. He had only come this time to confirm whether those old cultivators who had given orders were still there or not. Had anyone gone to exterminate the insects? The good news was that these people probably thought that they were the brains of the whole organization, and were the type to use their mouths and not their hands, so none of them had left. The main reason was that these old cultivators had different origins, but they all had a special characteristic, and that was that they were all second severance cultivators. It was them who had controlled the allocation of cultivators in the whole interior and exterior heaven for several years, as well as the handling of information from various parts of the universe. It had to be admitted that their work was very effective, but then again, this kind of command could be done by anyone. In terms of intelligence, there was no such thing as who was more intelligent. They were all half immortals, so who was more foolish than who? The only difference was that they had more connections and experience, and were more convenient in mobilizing people. Chapter 2282. Blood-dripping peak, ascending heaven peak. Which immortal did this place belong to? Too much time had passed, and it was impossible to know. The people of Interior Sky judged that this immortal had died a long, long time ago. This kind of situation was not rare in Interior Sky. The reason why they chose this place was due to some coincidental reasons, and it was indeed an ownerless immortal. The bamboo hat person made this choice. Ironically, he had built his nest, but it was kicked away by someone else. Therefore, he did not want to stay here for long. Even if he came, he would stay outside of blood-dripping peak, but he did not want others to see him in an embarrassing state. Just like now, he was still floating outside blood-dripping peak with his good friend Hong Tiangang, ready to deal with news from various regions of the universe. He was still the nominal host of the Heavenly Eye's search for Zerg in the universe, so he could not leave without permission. Of course, for half-immortals like them, there was no difference whether they could comfortably stay at the ascending heaven summit or float outside the summit. They didn't have the fatigue of sitting and standing. It was just a difference in status and authority. Although the bamboo hat person was young, he had a reserved depth. Even if he was despised and humiliated for no reason, he could still remain calm. In this sense, he and Lu Xiaoyi seemed to be the same kind of person. They both wanted to do great things, so they could not act according to their temperament. This Lu Xing is truly incredible. He killed the immortal rock. The swordsman really dared to do it. If this was in the past, Hong Tiangang praised. Killing immortals was what every ambitious cultivator in the lower realm wanted to do. However, some showed it, while others hid it in their hearts. The bamboo hat person snorted. So what if it was in the past? If they interfere in the affairs of the mortal realm privately, killing them would be for nothing. There's no problem. Hong Tiangang looked at his friend meaningfully. Then, if we go, will you fight for the glutton immortal? The bamboo hat person did not hesitate. No, we don't have the demon sword venerable on our side. The key to the glutton immortal this time is the perfect cooperation of the three swordsmen. Where are we going to find these three people? And as far as I know, they don't have to force themselves into the glutton immortal's desperate situation. It's unnecessary. However, Hong Tiangang disagreed with his view. In my opinion, their choice may not be wrong. As long as the Great Rock was still alive, the Wing tribe would not be able to stay out of this. The remaining 4 Taoist priests would be able to finish off the White Tiger. The swordsman was still at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. Forget it. What's the point of arguing about this? If he wasn't there personally, it would only be an armchair strategist. What made me curious was, with Lu Xing's violent temper, how could he allow the 4 Taoists to leave safely? It doesn't make sense. Even the winged man paid a heavy price for his senior brother's death. No, you still don't understand this person. This person was an ambitious and ruthless person. They were plotting something big. Everyone who could hide their emotions deeply was like this. I feel that what he did was very reasonable, because if I were in his position, I would do the same. Hong Tiangang sniffed. That's exactly how you people are. You fill the world of cultivators with schemes and schemes, but you lack joy. So boring. The bamboo hat man smiled faintly. That's why you don't understand. Those who played Thunderbolt didn't understand. Because your Thunderbolt doesn't know how to turn. What's that movement? Did you feel it? Of course Hong Tiangang felt it, because this feeling was undisguised and unbridled. It's a celestial explosion. A celestial explosion in the interior sky. Can the changes in the universe already affect here? Oh no, it seems. The two intuitively sensed danger and retreated. As they retreated, the bamboo hat man said urgently, "It's not a natural celestial phenomenon. It's a man-made celestial phenomenon. Who is this? Does he want to destroy the interior sky? Pay attention to the celestial phenomenon." What's that? Hong Tiangang laughed. It's a flying sword. Ha. This is the ambitious and ruthless person you were talking about. Forbearance? Plotting and then repaying? He came back with a special brew, and then came to Blood-Dripping Peak to exterminate the sect. This is the real swordsman. I feel that he's purer than you. A bright light came from the sky and landed on the ascending peak of Blood-Dripping Peak. Because the bamboo hat man and Hong Tiangang were floating outside the peak, they were in the direction of the light, so they were the first to feel it. However, the people on the peak were not as lucky as them. When the celestial phenomenon's aura appeared, they had no time to react. Because the target of this light was not a specific person, but the ascending peak, the entire blood-dripping peak. As the bright light fell, it suddenly exploded. It was as if a star was undergoing nirvana at the last moment of its life. This phenomenon could no longer be described as Tao Realm. It was the extreme of the universe, light and darkness, destruction and rebirth. Even though the bamboo hat man and Hong Tiangang retreated quickly, they were still shaken by the powerful shock wave until their qi and blood were surging. Their elemental energy was unstable, and their spiritual consciousness felt like it was not their own in an instant. They only recovered a little later, but they didn't see anyone, only heard a cold voice. Clean up the Emperor's subordinates, sweep away the evil. There are shameless people in high positions, using public power to avenge private wrongs. I'm not talented, but I'm willing to clear the obstacles for the two of you. Only then did the Bamboo Hat Man and Hong Tiangang react. This bastard, not only did he want to avenge his own private grudges, he even used them as a shield. The entire blood-dripping peak had been reduced to nothingness in the star's explosion. Even the dozens of neighboring immortals were implicated. Fortunately, this was a no-man's land, and there were very few people in the interior heaven, so it didn't affect anyone. The Bamboo Hat Man gritted his teeth. Golden Origin. Golden Origin. 20,000 years ago, the peerless demon Li Wuya's most shocking celestial phenomenon, swordsmanship. Unexpectedly, it was used again 20,000 years later. The most terrible thing was that this plague was not used in the void of the universe, but in the interior heaven with an atmosphere, so its destructive power was even more penetrative. The entire interior heaven was shaken by this. Countless half-immortals who stayed behind to guard the place leaped into the golden light and looked around blankly, not knowing where the change was. Where did the chaos come from? In the chaos, 7 or 8 light spots shone through, which meant that someone was being reborn. Needless to say, it was the person who was waving the fan at blood-dripping peak. Then, there were sword lights shuttling left and right. The accompanying result was the frequent appearance of the Tao vanishing celestial phenomenon. The massacre suddenly descended. There were no warnings, no signs, and no reason. As the sword lights shuttled back and forth, there was a very dissatisfied voice. Old White, you're being very unethical. I heard that kill-stealing was popular in Li Wuya's era, and all the senior brothers were kill-stealing experts. It's fine if it's just them, but you're so thick-headed. How could you do such a thing? The old white tiger cursed loudly. I knew it. From the moment you guys started whispering in my ear, I knew that my words had entered the donkey's ears. What's wrong with me? Can't I come? I'm also a victim, and also a victim. Chapter 2283. The battle came quickly and ended even faster. Although these old cultivators who stayed behind to wave the fan were also powerful, it depended on who they were compared to. They were all excluded from the Winged Skies hunting list, which showed that their strength was limited. Lu Xiaoyi and White Tiger were venting their anger. Under the sudden attack of the Golden Origin, the first attack forced them to reveal their past and future. Then, it was time to harvest their lives. The 7 old cultivators who were in charge had complicated backgrounds. They were from conservative forces, immortal circles, pure old and stubborn people, and those with ulterior motives. All of them were annihilated by the sudden attack. The key was that they were not mentally prepared at all. They never thought that someone would commit murder in the sky in a place like the interior sky. Golden Origin had instantly destroyed their first blood, so the rest was only a matter of time. After all, those who had been killing for a long time and those who schemed in the mountains were different. It was a pity that such a good immortal mountain was destroyed. Lu Xiaoyi was somewhat unsatisfied. He licked his lips. Out of the 7 people, Lao Bai had killed 2 of them. He was quite skilled at it. It was obvious that he had done it many times before. Lao Bai turned and left after killing them. Lu Xiaoyi pretended to be polite. Lao Bai, don't be in a hurry to leave. Come to my place for a drink. Lao Bai did not even turn his head. I don't care. Do whatever you want. Xuan Yuan's life or death has nothing to do with me. You bastards are all the same. You can't change even after repeated warnings. I must be blind to believe that you can restrain yourself a little. I don't care. If you come to my place again, I'll beat you up. Lao Bai left angrily. He had repeatedly warned him to be careful. In the next moment, this little bastard turned hostile and killed. It was obviously premeditated and deliberate, although it was also very happy to kill. It was temporarily happy, but what about in the future? Lu Xiaoyi was indifferent to Lao Bai's angry words. He was an old man after all. If he was angry, he could just coax him after a period of time. Say some sweet words, pretend to be pitiful, bring some sweet potatoes. Who had not been impulsive and muddle-headed? Young people should act like young people. Being mature was just an act. Being fierce was the real thing. He had to kill these people. Not only them, but those few Taoists as well. Perhaps Sinbai was an exception. And the Great Rock. With the death of the immortal Peng, only one great Peng had died. It was a pity that the great Peng did not have a nest. They were scattered all over the place and had no fixed abode. It was not easy to find them now, but it was just a matter of time. Those who had participated in the competition and dared to brazenly extend their claws of the sword vein would not be spared. He could see very clearly that there was no need for patience now. The universe was in chaos, and heroes were vying for supremacy. The immortal court couldn't even take care of itself, and the great Daos were collapsing one after another. It was an era of chaos, and it was the most suitable time to commit murder. It was the era of lawlessness. I can't take it anymore. If he endured this time, there would definitely be a next time. If they couldn't hurt him, they would hurt the people around him. I have to send a very clear signal to the world of cultivation. If you hurt my family, I will destroy your entire family. It was very Chinibyu, but sometimes it was necessary to be so irrational. Otherwise, others would ride on your head and shit on you. The Taoists ran quickly with the cover of the insect infestation. The winged men had already learned their lesson. They couldn't find the Great Rock for a while, and only those who plotted behind the scenes were left. They might not be the real backstage, but they must have been in cahoots. They were all guilty. Chong Lu couldn't die in vain. He couldn't care about things that were far away, and he couldn't care about things that happened in history. But what happened in front of him, he had to let people know that he, Inspector Liu, was not only a troublemaker, but also dared to kill. It didn't matter if you were an interior or exterior master. If you really pissed him off, it was useless to hide in the immortal court. It was only at this moment that he truly experienced the happiness of Li Wuya. Why did he have to think so much? With one sword, he would naturally be relieved of his worries. Wasn't thousands of years of painstakingly practicing killing skills just for this moment? Since someone else had started it, everyone shouldn't be idle. The matter was settled. He noticed that there were two people in the sky not far away with uncertain expressions, so he put on a smile and greeted them cordially. I was impulsive. I destroyed fellow Taoist bamboo, Hat's territory. But I think the name chosen for this blood-dripping peak is inauspicious. It's dripping blood and rising to heaven. It turns out that fellow Taoist had premeditated and even borrowed my knife. Speaking of which, I can't compare to you. The bamboo was speechless. He only took a deep breath. Inspector Liu's actions are related to grievances. I won't comment, but I have to report what happened here to the heavenly eyes. Please forgive me, Inspector Liu. However, Hong Tiangang expressed his appreciation. Inspector Liu does things without hesitation. This is the true nature of cultivators of my generation. It's a pity that I can't fight side by side with Inspector Liu. It's a pity. Liu Xiaoyi flew out slowly and complained, "You don't thank me for helping you get rid of these turtles who took over your nest, and you still want to report to me? Fellow Taoist, you're really disappointing." The bamboo hat wanted to retort, but he didn't know what to say. While he was hesitating, that person had already gone far away. Hong Tiangang clapped his hands and laughed. With a wave of his hand, gratitude and grievances are settled with a sword. I now believe that this person is an ambitious and ruthless person, because a truly ambitious and ruthless person will never rely only on patience and scheming. They will also occasionally be unexpectedly brutal and cruel. Never letting others know what he's thinking is the best deterrent to others. Old friend, you also have to change. If you blindly endure and hide behind to settle small debts, you will only pull further and further away from him. The bamboo hat let out a long breath and said with a bitter smile, "How can I not understand what you mean? But can this person's actions be easily imitated? Just this strength alone is enough to make people sigh. You have to understand that everyone has their own path, the path that suits them the most. And not just imitating others because they're happy, but in the end, they'll be nothing like them. We have our own path. But the good news is that truly seeing this person clearly is also beneficial for us to make future judgments. Hong Tiangang nodded. What you say also makes sense. I'm afraid that others won't be able to learn his methods. If they really went to learn it, they wouldn't be able to pretend and would end up losing their lives. The bamboo hat's expression turned solemn. Since someone is helping me solve my problem, then I'll kindly accept it. Find another place and start the deployment again. We can't let one person affect our important matters. This is the Heavenly Eye's mission and also our opportunity. If we do it well, we'll naturally get bonus points from the Heavenly Tao. This is the core. It can't be changed. Hong Tiangang leaped. Fine, I'll go and contact a few more people. We can't just be the two of us here singing the empty fort strategy, right? Sigh. I wonder how many people will still dare to come here to do things after this incident. I'm just afraid that flying sword will fall from the sky. TSK. That golden origin is really impressive. I can't even find such a powerful move in my lightning great Tao. Even Lu Xiaoyi is like this. I wonder what kind of scene it would be if it was Li Wuya from back then who used it. It really leaves a lasting aftertaste. Chapter 2284. The bloody incident at Blood-Dripping Peak immediately spread throughout the interior heaven, and then spread to the exterior heaven. Ever since Lu Xiaoyi came to the interior heaven, he had always appeared to be as gentle as water, looking like a nice guy. It had never even been said that he had fought or gotten angry with anyone, causing many people's legends about him to be in a vague state. But this time, everyone was clear. This was a wolf cub that had disguised himself as a sheep. When he opened his mouth to bite someone, that was when blood would really be spilled. No one stood out to uphold justice for this. It was not worth it. The whole incident was clear and logical, and the grudges were clear. You failed to surround someone, and in the end, you were returned alive and killed. This was the most classic scene in the cultivation world, and there was no one to blame. Furthermore, no one was an idiot about the inside story behind this incident, and they all had reliable guesses. Those who were involved hid themselves deeply, and even left temporarily. Those who were not involved were high and mighty. In this era where the great Tao was established, who would wade into these muddy waters for the sake of a little friendship and so-called justice? Wouldn't that be seeking trouble for themselves? They might not even be able to get away with it. In the past, in the interior heaven, when there were similar cases of murder, there would always be second severance old cultivators of the interior heaven who would step forward, either to mediate, warn, or punish. But as the saying went, killing one person was killing. Killing 10,000 people was a hero. When you killed a dozen of these old second severance, old cultivators of the interior heaven in one go, no one would step forward. The whole interior heaven sank into a strange silence. They turned a blind eye, heard a deaf ear, and pretended not to know. Because the murderer was brutal. Because order had collapsed. Because everyone had to clean their own snow. There was a more important matter in front of everyone, and that was to go to the land of the Yellow Dragon to establish Tao, in front of a great Tao immortal, who would be willing to take care of such a thankless task. They couldn't even hide. In the end, the interior heaven was a place without sex, and there was no reason for them to step forward even if they had a saved face. Thus, the death of 7 second severance half-immortals, such a big murder case, actually did not stir up much news. When it spread, they knew, and then there was no more, and then, just like in some celestial mountain, a few insignificant little beasts had died in a fight for territory. The value of human life was really chilling in this chaotic era. In such a leisurely atmosphere, Lu Xiaoyi welcomed Heaven's Eye's inquiry. A magnificent treasure light descended. Within the treasure light, there were 4 illusory figures with different auras. Clearly, they were the projections of the 4 immortal monarchs of the Heavenly Eye. This was the first time he had seen such a grand scene. Previously, it was just a figment of his imagination. Now, it was actual Hongguang. In fact, he was very curious. The immortals of the immortal court were dying one after another. Why were the four immortal monarchs still alive? In terms of probability, this was not scientific. Could there be other reasons? Was it because of the heavenly eyes and his contributions to the world of cultivators that he had survived the accident longer than other deities? One of the phantoms said, Xianyuan Lu Xiaoi, as a member of the Eye of Heaven, you have the position of enforcer, yet you knowingly broke the law and killed your colleagues without reporting it. Do you know your crime? Lu Xiaoi denied it directly. I killed him, but it's not appropriate for me to admit my guilt. Actually, I know nothing about the position of enforcer. But if the meaning of this position is to be killed without being able to fight back, then I don't care about this position. Also, I'm requesting to withdraw from the Eye of Heaven because someone is plotting against me. You immortal monarchs failed to see through the truth and instead helped the evildoer. If I stay here for too long, I'm afraid I won't live for long. Lu Xiaoi turned the tables and started scolding the immortal court. This was something he had planned long ago. The Eye of Heaven's interrogation was unavoidable, but his situation was not bad. The heavenly Eye immortal monarch had been able to survive until now because of the so-called fairness of the Eye of Heaven. Perhaps there would be some little tricks behind the scenes, but they would not dare to show favoritism on the surface. Speaking of which, he still had to thank Lord Numinous Treasure and Ancient Beast God for their help. The two of them had successfully escalated the internal strife of killing 7 members of the Sky Eyes to a relatively high level, which led to the joint trial of the 4 halls. With so many people in the interrogation, some tricks could no longer be used. Therefore, even though Lord Numinous Treasure and Ancient Beast God were sitting there without saying a word, their presence was actually a form of help in disguise. It was still that illusory figure. Are you suspecting that we are bending the law for favoritism? Lu Xiaoi's neck stiffened. It's not a suspicion. It's a confirmation. The host deliberately arranged and set up an inescapable net. Sealed space, alien territory, impure earth from afar, inner and outer scenic skies gathered, eastern and western skies imparted Tao, yellow dragon powder messenger, and 3-day night watchers. There was also a great Peng who came from afar. In the end, the great Peng personally came. I just want to ask, whose handiwork is this? In the hall, the mirror of eminence hangs high. Under the heavenly Tao, it can see through everything. Who dares to tell me that these are all coincidences? That they are all accidents? If these are all accidents, then the golden origin in the inner scenic skies was also an accident for me. I was practicing a move and made a mistake. Lu Xiaoi's ruffian temper flared up, and he ignored everything. I can accept the punishment. The lords in the heavens can also not pursue this matter. Those in power are not guilty. But there are many people involved in this matter. Who is behind this? Who is spreading the news? Who is using the wing-spread wings to raise insects and destroy the foundation of the human cultivation world? Who is helping the tyrant to do evil and nurture a tiger? If you can't find out or don't dare to, or are in cahoots and only vent your anger on me, then don't blame me for rebelling against the heavenly eyes and not obeying them. Heaven has its heavenly Tao, and people have their rules. Only others are allowed to do bad things, but not me. I think there is no need for the heavenly eyes to exist. Let's just disband and rely on our own abilities. Life and death are up to the heavens. There was silence in the virtual shadow. Some were calm and unruffled in the midst of chaos. Some were gloating, and some were angry out of humiliation. Some were sitting on pins and needles, and so on. Originally, it was a good opportunity to denounce. But now this ruffian directly took away the fig leaf and questioned the value of the heavenly eye's existence. This was borrowing power. There were 2 kinds of borrowing power, forward borrowing and reverse borrowing. Forward borrowing meant following the general trend and taking advantage of the chaos to fish in troubled waters. But the heavenly eye's organization chose to borrow reverse. In a chaotic world, they maintained order, protected living creatures, followed the most ancient distinction between good and evil, and became a clear stream in the torrential flood, thus gaining the special favor of the heavenly Tao. They had indeed gained it. Since the collapse of the Great Tao until now, the four immortals had not met with any mishap, even though less than half of the immortals had died. This was clear proof. Then, Lu Xiaoyi's attack was the Achilles heel of the Heavenly Eyes now. There might be some people who would hate this, but on the surface, this layer of fig leaf could not be removed. Some things have been hanging for such a long time. They could not be abandoned just because of one person or one thing. Amidst the awkward silence, another human silhouette spoke up. That's right. The Heavenly Eyes will send someone else to investigate the reason. But you killed a member of the Heavenly Eyes without reporting it. Although there is a reason, it can't be encouraged. Now, you're stripped of your position as the enforcer and demoted to an inspector. We will make a conclusion after everything is investigated clearly. Are you convinced? Lu Xiaoyi was a little confused. There is a position under the enforcer. Chapter 2285. Lu Xiaoyi was demoted to an inspector. This change in personnel within Heavens, I was even more heated than his murder. It instantly spread throughout both interior and exterior. Heavens, I had long become Bright Eyes. This was also a special response under special circumstances. It was to raise this flag, gather strength, and maintain order. Therefore, the news was all public. He killed 7 people and was demoted by 1 rank. What was going on? Some busybodies dug into Heaven's Eyes professional system. They didn't know until they dug, but they were shocked. There were actually many ranks under the Inspector of Punishments. Bo Zheng, Xiaoguan, Bing Chao, Yufu, Pei Rong, Yu Rin, and so on. How many more people would die when this evil person was completely wiped out? This was a person with a license to kill, so this was probably the only way to understand it. Some were dissatisfied, some were resentful, and some were indifferent. If they didn't get involved in such a quarrel, they wouldn't be bothered at all. In fact, there is only one characteristic of this ferocious person in the interior realm. I won't attack unless I'm attacked. It didn't seem excessive. Inspector Liu planned to hold a big banquet in interior, and the topic was his 3,000th birthday. In fact, he wasn't too sure whether it was 3,000 years, but it was probably about the same. The key was that at this time, it was necessary to express goodwill after being cruel once, and to harmonize the mood of interior. It was hypocritical, but it had to be done. It was a kind of attitude. It could greatly improve everyone's view of him, and let people understand that although his methods were cruel, he was a reasonable person and didn't kill for the sake of killing. Cultivators' birthdays were actually a disguised gathering. Mortals valued birthdays because they didn't have many years to live. Cultivators were different. Because of their long life rings, their birthdays were usually counted in round numbers. For example, 1,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years. Most of the time, it was a private gathering of 3 or 5 good friends, wasting time, sighing about life, commenting on the past, and looking forward to the future. It was rare to hold a big banquet like in the mortal world, where no one was rejected. If it was too vulgar, it would lack the artistic conception of cultivation. But Inspector Liu was different. Of course, no matter what this person did, the interior celestial beings were already used to his mischief and were not surprised. However, since he had just killed someone, it was understandable for him to spread his remonstrance. They all understood what he meant. You're here because you don't blame me for killing. Then, they would have a foundation to get along with each other. If you don't come, does that mean you have something to say? It was a kind of hidden stance. You could understand it as their attitude towards this matter, or as the positioning of the new and old forces and so on. Shuofeng Qifan was taking care of things by his side. The location was still Qin Xian's abode of immortals. He had long treated this place as his own. Once he was done with it, he could just change to another place. How many tables do we need to prepare? I estimate that there are less than 400 cultivators in the interior realm right now. If half of them were to come, there would be plenty of tables and chairs. Where would I find them? Why don't we use stones to make up the numbers? It'll make it seem closer to nature. Chief Fan was a bit uncertain. The greatest difficulty of holding a banquet was that they didn't know how many guests would come. Without any preparations, they couldn't treat everyone equally. This was the beginning of a grudge. North Wind added, "There's also the banquet. We do have the food, but it's a bit messy. Don't tell me we'll have a duck on one table and a roast lamb on the other. There are hundreds of tables." Of course, it was impossible for cultivators to share tables at a banquet. It had to be a table for one person. In that case, it would be difficult to maintain consistency, and it would be easy to distinguish the differences. Even if he didn't eat a single mouthful, you couldn't fool him. Lu Xiaoyi looked at them in amusement. "What are you thinking? There's no need to prepare a table. If we're good friends, we won't care. Even if we came reluctantly, we won't stay for the banquet. We'll just say hello. The situation is unclear, and the future is unclear. At this time, it's best to keep your position. Who would really sit down to eat and drink and call each other brothers? What I want is an attitude. They're just giving me an attitude. They're just stating the facts. It's not like we'll be on the same boat in the future." He guessed correctly. On the day of the banquet, all the Celestials were present. It was very lively. Their attitudes were very polite, and their gifts were dafa. They just didn't stay for the banquet. No matter what the reason was, there would always be a reason. It seemed like these people had communicated with each other, and everyone had the same attitude. Their meaning was, "We can tolerate your massacre this time, but it doesn't mean that you can do it in the future." This was the normal behavior of the real, top-level cultivation world. Everyone had their own pursuits. They wouldn't follow the crowd and curry favor with those in power. Cultivators who had opened their immortal wisdom were the most difficult group of people to converge with in this world. Moreover, his friends were basically outside. They were running around everywhere, searching for the traces of insects. In the land of the Yellow Dragon, those who stayed in the interior sky were mostly from the old faction. Although many people didn't participate in the confrontation between the old and new factions, they grieved for the loss of their own kind. It was very difficult for them to let go of the knot in their hearts. This was human nature. In the end, only 40 to 50 half-immortals stayed. Compared to the nearly 400 half-immortals who came to congratulate him, this was very awkward. These people had successfully expressed their attitude by not cooperating with him once. Lu Xiaoyi didn't care. He raised his wine cup and greeted his friends. Therefore, they will grow old. They will become history because they don't accept new things. They resist the trend and place themselves outside of the revolution. Some people call this persistence, the persistence of tradition. But what I want to ask is, where does tradition come from? Is it destined from birth? Isn't it the conclusion of the predecessor's generation after generation in the revolution? If they really respect tradition so much, they should eat raw meat and drink blood forever, and not delude themselves about immortality. Everyone was deeply moved. This was a paradox. In the interior sky, which had always been famous for its ability and quality, people naturally felt superior to those in the exterior sky. But before the change of the era, its revolutionary power was far inferior to those in the exterior sky. It was very puzzling. The cultivation of ancient methods is a double-edged sword. It may be more natural, but may also hurt oneself. We are cultivating ancient methods. It wasn't Chong Fa who followed the rules. We're ancient methods. Are all the methods of the ancients, the predecessors, and the history good? Do they all need to be followed meticulously? Even if they are already incompatible with the current environment and are not suitable for the times? What I want to say is, ancient is not only ancient, it is changing the ancient. The true essence of ancient methods doesn't lie in the divine skills and secret techniques that they created. It is the spirit of the predecessors who dared to innovate in a situation where they had nothing. Ancient is the struggle of the predecessors in the ancient environment. That's why there is the current cultivation world. Now, the environment has changed, and the era is about to change. Do we hold on to those so-called divine skills and secret techniques? Or do we follow the innovation spirit of the ancients who fought against the heavens, the earth, and the universe? I think it is the latter. So what we are creating now will eventually become ancient methods. This is the spirit of ancient methods. Instead of lying on the ancestors' things and not biting on them. This was the first time Lu Xiaoyi explained his ideas in a slightly formal setting. Needless to say, the effect was good. He also started a debate about what ancient methods were in the interior sky. Amidst the vigorous debate, his ideas began to spread and deepened with the addition and perfection of his followers. The world was about to change. Chapter 2286. Lu Xiaoyi's interpretation of the ancient method in the interior heaven was embroiled in a huge debate. It was a clash between the old and the new, a battle between change and maintenance. More and more people were involved in it, because it was related to everyone's future. Gradually, they forgot that there was someone who killed mercilessly in the interior heaven. Lu Xiaoyi had successfully diverted everyone's attention from the massacre, and at the same time, established himself as a new grandmaster of the ancient arts of the interior. If his circle in the past was loose, then this circle now had a trace of cohesion. This was the effect of theory guiding practice. He started to lead the ship officially. Unknowingly, Escort Lu did not jump into the whirlpool of debate. This was not the magnanimity of the originator of creativity. When there was a problem, his disciples would do the work. He would let the small fries fight for it first, while he would observe the changes and make notes. Then, he would draw conclusions from it, learn from it, and form a system. It was just like a group of people in a certain memory, quietly hiding behind a dark screen and watching the heated discussion in the book review section. They secretly laughed and wrote down the scenes that were helpful to them, while blacklisting the malicious victims. This was the power of the group. Who asked him to be the first to come up with such a theory? Testing the waters of a new concept. He continued to stay in the cave and work on his conception of the Great Way. The Great Way was real and could be transformed into something that could be used to fight. As for these abstract theories, it was just a pastime before tea. He waited here for his friends who had spread out his inner circle. A month after the birthday party, an ordinary mortal came to the completely quiet abode of immortals. He was a villager at the foot of the mountain. In the interior world, some demi-immortals were willing to cover up their abode of immortals very deeply. They wanted to prevent unnecessary disturbances. However, there were also some who were indifferent. Their abode of immortals was neither steep nor hidden. They also did not prevent ordinary mortals from accidentally stumbling into their abode of immortals who got lost. This was decided by different personalities. Qing Xian's cave was like this. They did not avoid outside disturbances, so it was not impossible for ordinary people to find their way here. The villagers sent him a birthday gift that came late. The reason why it was late was probably because the villager had been climbing the mountain. According to him, he had been climbing for a month. It was a jade slip. Lu Xiaoyi opened it, and the jade slip immediately turned into a breeze and dissipated, leaving no trace behind. However, the contents of a jade slip were clearly transmitted to him. It was a congratulatory letter from Tsinbai. Of course, the congratulatory letter was only a pretext. The real content was something else. It was to humiliate his previous boast. Lu Xiaoyi closed his eyes. After a moment of silence, he sighed. This inexplicable warning made it difficult to distinguish whether it was real or fake. Fortunately, there was still time. He gave some gifts and sent the happy villagers down the mountain. With this kind of back and forth, he could live a happy life for many years. He continued to wait and study the great Tao. In his current situation, his focus was no longer on the existing 36 Khanate Taos. Instead, he focused on the newly created Taos of Star and Balance. Now, he had added Devour, Heavenly Tribulation, and Reincarnation. The last three were just in case. He really doubted whether no one would stand out to stop such a crucial and subversive grand Tao from appearing. That would make him an enemy of almost all cultivators. It would greatly reduce the value of immortals. They would no longer be able to enjoy eternal peace once they succeeded like in the past. There would definitely be someone who would stop it in some way that he could never predict. He would not be able to guard against it. The only thing he could do was to quietly go against it. There were two problems in this. One was the problem of star and devour repelling each other. The great Tao of star was the 5 ties plus 5 elements plus creation. The great Tao of devour was the 5 ties plus destruction plus unification. He could only choose one of the two. They were two completely opposite directions of the formation of the universe. One eventually formed everything in the universe. The other's ultimate goal was to swallow the universe into a big hole. To him, a realistic problem was which one to choose in the end. If he could devour someone and successfully complete the Tao integration stage, then he would naturally choose the star he wanted. However, if no one came to complete the Tao integration stage, or if those who had the ability to complete the Tao integration stage all gave up due to various reasons, then he would have no choice but to give up on the star. The key was that the time left for him to make a decision might be very short. It would be the instant when the epoch changed. It was very difficult to grasp. Another problem was whether he needed to combine the great Tao of heavenly tribulation and the great Tao of lightning. The deeper his understanding of the heavenly tribulation, the more he felt this kind of urgency. Killing Immortal Peng was a little sloppy because his heavenly tribulation was not complete. If it wasn't for something he couldn't understand at the moment, Immortal Peng wouldn't have died. At most, it would have lost its physical body. The Tao realm part in the Immortal Court would still be safe. Theoretically, when the heavenly tribulation descended, no matter how many incarnations one had, none of them could escape. But now, he could only strike what was in front of him. He couldn't strike what was related to it. This was a huge flaw. After thinking about it, he could only pull the great Tao of lightning into it. But if he did that, wouldn't he destroy another innate great Tao? It was impossible for there to be two lightning systems in the world. This was different from the countless lightning orthodoxies in the main world. That was only a superficial difference. There could only be one basic thing. These things all needed a lot of time to perfect. To be honest, some of them were beyond his ability. His limit was the two new great Taos. As for the rest, he could only rely on Marching Monk, Qing Xian, Senior Sister, and the others to perfect them. What else could he learn from them? Since he started cultivating, many great Taos that he knew had appeared. For example, Pure Yang, Illusionary Dream, Life, and even the Great Peng's Emptiness. He was working hard, but the others weren't idle either. He actually wanted to go to the land of Yellow Dragon. Everyone had the same thought. Bei Feng and Qi Fan, who helped him set up the banquet, also started their journey early after the banquet. They had been waiting for this day for a long time. After the matter with Lu Xiaoyi came to an end, they naturally wanted to pursue their own future. There, it was said that nearly 1,000 Tao tablets had been erected there. Just thinking about it made them excited. They could see the thoughts of the most outstanding people in the universe colliding. At the moment before the arrival of the new era, they would decide who was better, which great Taos would be better, which great Taos would fall into the dust. But he still restrained the desire in his heart, because he vaguely felt that the time wasn't right yet. The great Taos that appeared now were still unimportant and didn't have much hope. There weren't many great Taos that were truly competitive. He needed to discuss with his friends in the fifth ring. From White Tiger, he learned a lot of history and understood the overall structure of the sect. It was actually the structure set by Li Wuya. He wanted the fifth ring to appear as a whole in front of the universe's cultivation world. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.